What if you could hold your own mortality in your hands? Feel the gentle tug of life slipping away with each deliberate exhale, and watch as the thunderous echo of your heartbeat fades into a distant memory. You lie beneath a row of humming machines, electrodes pressed cold against your chest, wires snaking across your skin like metallic vines. A soft voice counts down as a current pulses through your body, coaxing your heart to slow, to falter, to stop. Every muscle clenches in anticipation. Every breath becomes a conscious ritual. You know you are alive, and yet you stand at the edge of oblivion, staring into a void that no one should ever dare to explore. The first time your pulse flatlines, an electric hush descends, monitors go silent. The hum of life support carries on as if nothing changed, but you feel the world shift beneath you. Blood pools in shadows behind your ribs, a slow tide of warmth retreating into darkness. Pain dissolves beneath the hush, leaving a crystalline calm so pure it borders on disbelief. Your senses sharpen in that vacuum. Every rustle of a breath in the next room, the faintest vibration in the floor, the metallic taste of fear on your tongue. In that instant, life is distilled to its essence, a precarious miracle teetering on the brink of annihilation. You wonder why your mind does not surrender along with your heartbeat. How can consciousness remain unbroken when the vessel that sustains it lies dormant? The answer is both astonishing and terrifying. As your body cools and your organs whisper in half-light, your awareness blossoms, thoughts stretch like elastic bands, pulling apart into strange shapes and colors. Memories you thought forgotten unravel, looping back on themselves until you relive childhood moments with the vividness of a dream. You taste the crisp scent of rain on pavement and hear your own laughter echoing down a hallway you cannot place. It all unfolds in a timeless suspension, a silent testament to the resilience of the human spirit. This isn't fantasy or magic. It is the product of a protocol that merges ancient breathing disciplines with cutting-edge technology. You learn specialized breath holds that flood your bloodstream with carbon dioxide, tricking your body into a hibernation state. Then, tiny doses of engineered drugs guide your metabolism toward near freeze, slowing every cellular process to a crawl. Finally, calibrated electrical pulses ease your heart into a graceful pause. The choices are deliberate, precise. The risk is unimaginable. And yet, through this synthesis of mind and machine, you achieve what should be impossible. You stop your heart. What you discover in that silent realm challenges everything you thought you knew. Pain ceases to be a warning. It becomes a distant echo. Fear, once your constant companion, transforms into a gateway. You feel the hush of eternity settle around you, a gentle embrace that dissolves the walls between self and universe. Some say they glimpse the outline of galaxies woven in threads of light. Others speak of a voice, ancient, unspoken, whispering truths they cannot unhear. You realize that death is not an end, but a threshold, a membrane separating the known from the unimaginable. And then the countdown reverses. The machines hum louder. The current shifts, coaxing your heart back into its relentless rhythm. You feel a shudder in your chest, a flutter like a bird startled into flight. Blood surges once more, warmth flooding through you in a triumphant roar. Breath returns, ragged and urgent, each inhalation a victory over the void. Your senses overload, bright lights sting your eyes, noise crashes into your ears, and the world feels unbearably real. You clutch at the sheets, anchoring yourself to this fragile existence, marveling at how easily it can slip away. But the true revelation comes later, long after the electrodes are peeled away and the labs grow silent. You carry a secret within your bones, a memory of the void that shapes every moment. Loud noises feel jarring because you tasted absolute silence. Pain seems sharper because you know what it means to feel nothing. And joy becomes a flood, so intense it threatens to drown you, for you have glimpsed the emptiness that lies beneath every heartbeat. You learn that life is not defined by the pulse in your chest, but by the moments you seize before it ends. Yet no discovery comes without a price. Some who attempted the suspension never returned whole. Memories fractured, emotions splintered, they wandered through the world haunted by echoes too raw to face. Others found themselves changed irrevocably, drawn toward darkness, or bathed in an inexplicable euphoria that eroded the boundaries between self and other. Families sued, governments hushed up the research, and the scientists retreated into shadows, carrying with them the knowledge that they had opened a door that might never be closed. Now, as you walk away from the experiment, you understand that stopping your heart is more than a feat of physiology. It is a descent into the depths of your own psyche. You confront your fears naked, stripped of every shield and denial. You touch the brink of nothingness and discover that nothingness has a voice, a texture, a shape. And once you have heard its whisper, you can never unhear it. Every breath thereafter carries the weight of that silent void, urging you to live with a fierceness born of near death. Imagine standing in a windowless room as the floor beneath you vanishes and you press your toes against thin air, yet you stay upright. You lift a foot and it hovers, you shift your weight and you glide forward, each step lighter than the last. There's no harness, no wires, only an unseen force cradling you. Your heart hammers, your breath catches, and you ask, is this flight or illusion? Your body insists you're still bound by gravity, but every fiber of your being rebels against that certainty. You weren't born to float. From infancy, you learned that weight equals safety, that contact with the earth keeps you grounded, literally and metaphorically. Yet secret experimenters discovered the loophole in that rule, crafting environments where the rules bend. Parabolic jets became flying laboratories in 1960, where brave volunteers punched their legs into the sky, only to plummet moments later, laughing and gasping with childlike wonder. They called it zero gravity, but it felt like rebirth, a momentary escape from every burden tethering them to the world below. Imagine the first person who dared to step unassisted into such a chamber. Their mind must have rebelled. Every instinct screamed to brace for a fall. Yet they found their balance mid-air, wobbling at first, then learning to trust the void. With each tentative step, their confidence grew. In that instant, they discovered the power hidden inside their own vestibular system, the part of the brain that lies about motion and space until the world changes so radically that it has no choice but to adapt. Behind locked doors, researchers refined these illusions until they were nearly seamless. They rigged rooms with magnetic fields that counteracted the pull of the earth, allowing test subjects to walk along vertical walls as though they were flat surfaces. At first, volunteers panicked when their footsteps registered on what should have been a glass panel. Fear blitzed through them. Fear of falling, fear of madness, fear that their eyes and mind had betrayed them. And then, in the hush that followed, they realized their bodies felt whole again, unchained from the constant tug of gravity. Weightlessness is intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. On the one hand, you sense a liberation deeper than any drug can provide. You become weightless only to discover the weight you've been carrying inside, your doubts, your regrets, your fears. On the other hand, the loss of a familiar reference point can send your mind spiraling. Without gravity's feedback, your senses slip, your body can't predict the next move, and every gesture is an experiment in survival. Some experiments went further, blending sensory deprivation with these anti-gravity effects. Subjects would enter a dark, silent sphere, their bodies suspended in water, warm to skin temperature, buoyant enough to erase the boundary between flesh and fluid. In that womb-like environment, they felt themselves dissolve. When the lights flicked on and they stepped back onto solid ground, they trembled, convinced they'd been weightless for hours, though only minutes had passed. Their perception of time and space had shifted, exposing how fragile our sense of reality truly is. But perhaps the most astonishing breakthroughs came from the mind, not the machines. Certain practitioners, steeped in ancient traditions, guided students through breathing and meditation techniques that induced a form of inner levitation. They taught that gravity is not just a physical force, but a mental one. By centering awareness in the core, aligning every thought with a single vertical axis, those who mastered the practice felt themselves rise off the ground. Skeptics dismissed them as stage magicians or deluded mystics. Yet, when cameras rolled under controlled conditions, a few individuals really did lift barely off the floor, their shadows shrinking as their bodies ascended by mere inches. Those inches mattered. They revealed a hidden truth. Your body always held the promise of flight, locked away under layers of belief, habit, and fear. The secret experiments didn't invent something new. They peeled back the familiar, exposing the extraordinary beneath. They taught you that reality is malleable, shaped by expectations and perception. They showed how quickly your mind surrenders to demonstration when you can no longer trust gravity's tyranny. As you listen to this, you might scoff, dismissing it as fringe science or pseudoscience. But think of the everyday miracles you accept without question: the light bending through glass, the invisible air keeping a plane aloft, the tiny particles colliding to make an apple fall from a tree. You believe these because they fit a narrative you trust. What if you shifted that narrative just a fraction and allowed for possibilities that feel impossible now? Walking on air isn't merely about defying physics, it's about overturning the code by which you navigate existence. It's about recognizing that every law you hold as absolute is only a consensus of the collective mind. When individuals slip through the cracks, harnessing magnetic fields or harnessing their own neural circuits, they don't break physics, they break consensus. They expand what you silently accept as reality. And what does that reveal about you? It reveals how powerfully you're shaped by invisible forces, societal norms, inherited beliefs, self-imposed limits. When you witness someone stepping lightly on thin air, you feel a tremor in your own boundaries. You wake to the possibility that your own invisible shackles can be undone. Now imagine stepping into that realm yourself, feeling your body lighten, trusting each movement, not because you can see the floor, but because you chose to believe in the unseen. With each step, your confidence grows until you dance on an axis of thin air, unmoored from fear. There's a moment when weightless wonder becomes a mirror held up to your own life. You realize that gravity isn't the only thing holding you down. Guilt, shame, doubt, they cling to you like invisible weights. But the experiments that let people walk on air taught something deeper. You can release those weights if you learn to shift your inner center, if you master the art of believing in the breach between what is and what could be. And that is just the beginning of what secret science has to show us. But the next secret power you're about to uncover won't let you walk on air, it will let you see right through walls. Do you feel the walls pressing in on you? Thick barriers meant to separate here from there, inside from out. The brick, the plaster, the steel beams, your senses insist they are solid, unbreakable, trustworthy. But what if those walls were merely a veil, a deception woven by your own mind to keep you from seeing the world beyond? In a secret laboratory buried beneath the city's foundations, experimentalists set out to rip that veil away, to force volunteers to witness what lurks behind the fortress of their own perception. They whispered in darkened halls about a power that could shatter the illusion of solidity and rewire you to see the invisible. They promised wonders beyond imagination, but also nightmares hiding within. They said it would change humanity forever. They were not wrong. Volunteers were guided into stark white chambers, their eyes swaddled by opaque panels that muted the world into silence. A low-frequency hum pulsed from unseen machinery, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. Electrodes were taped across temples, wires snaking down to blackened boxes, humming with promise. Every volunteer was told only this: you will learn to see through barriers. No one explained the cost. In that hush, anticipation and fear tangled into a feral excitement that crackled in the air like static before a storm. The first sessions yielded nothing more than flickers on the panel, shadows drifting across a sealed door, as if echoing voices pressed against your skull. But each repetition sharpened those shadows into ghostly outlines. A door handle, a crack in the wood grain, the glint of metal nails driven into the frame. Volunteers described the shapes with hesitant wonder, the tremor in their voices betraying a mixture of awe and dread. They found themselves peering into spaces they never knew existed, as if reality itself had folded back. Then came the true breakthrough. Researchers applied millimeter wave spectrometry to the opaque barrier, bathing it in pulses that penetrated every layer. Those returning waves were fed into microprojectors embedded in contact lenses, merging electromagnetic echoes with actual vision. The wall transformed from solid obstacle to translucent veil, revealing hidden cavities, hollow conduits, and the trembling pulse of life beyond. Subjects gasped as their eyes peeled through inches of steel and concrete, their vision bending around corners to expose hidden truths. The impossible became routine. One volunteer later described the moment her vision pierced the wall as both beautiful and grotesque. She watched a lab rat scuttle through its maze, its skeleton illuminated like a lantern in darkness, each tiny bone glowing eerily through plastic walls. Then she saw her own hand backlit by the device, veins swirling like tributaries in a river delta. She nearly screamed when she realized the same technique could reveal the human body's deepest secrets. She had torn open a realm never meant to be seen. As the technique evolved, thicker barriers crumbled before the gaze of the augmented eye. Vault doors meant to guard priceless artifacts, reduced to haze. Safe rooms, once impervious to sound and sight, became transparent theaters. Researchers even demonstrated the ability to detect minute electrical signals from living tissue behind walls, watching hearts beat and lungs expand in real time. They called it the revelation of a hidden world, but each experiment edged closer to unraveling the very notion of privacy. But the gift of ultimate vision carried a terrible price. Subjects fell into nightmares where every wall became a window, every barrier a betrayal. They began to see through walls at home, in their apartments, in their neighbors' living rooms. Unbidden images flashed across the back of their eyelids in waking hours, a relentless gallery of secrets. Sleeplessness set in. Anxiety gnawed at their sanity until some begged to have the implants removed, only to discover their brains had been rewired, unable to unsee the invisible. Unsurprisingly, those in power took notice. Intelligence agencies saw a new era of espionage, silent operatives with eyes that passed through bunkers and embassies alike. Corporations imagined industrial sabotage from behind secure vaults, targeting prototypes before designs ever left the drawing board. Nights were spent in boardrooms, plotting how to weaponize voyeuristic sight as much as soldiers trained to use it. Morality became secondary to the allure of control. The ability to shatter every wall seemed too tempting to resist. What, after all, is a wall but a mutual promise of separation and safety? When that promise shatters, the contract between minds and matter dissolves. Walls become relics of an archaic past, replaced by invasive sightlines that pierce every hidden corner. Neighborhoods lose their boundaries, families lose their sanctuaries, and the quiet corners of the world fall under an unblinking gaze. Privacy is reduced to a quaint memory, a luxury reserved for those who remain unseen. You might ask yourself if you would accept such a gift. Would you trade the security of hidden spaces for the intoxicating clarity of absolute vision? Imagine passing through a city without walls, where every secret door, every hidden passage, every whisper behind closed doors is laid bare. What power that would offer, and what curse. Would you use it to protect or to pry, to rescue the innocent, or to harvest secrets for your own ends? The choice becomes a crucible for the soul. Your body tightens at the thought, every nerve ending alight with a thrill of possibility and the sting of intrusion. Your mind wrestles with the temptation to peer beyond the veil, to uncover truths otherwise locked away, even as your heart recoils from the burden you might carry. To see the hidden is to shoulder knowledge that can never be unseen, to bear the weight of every secret laid bare before you, to forever stand on the edge of a world without sanctuary. The greatest experiment of all was not the one that revealed what lies beyond matter, but the one that exposed the fragility of human boundaries. When you learn you can see through walls, you realize the walls within yourself, from fear, from doubt, from ignorance, are just as permeable. The campaign to redefine the limits of perception becomes a mirror held up to the mind, forcing you to confront the hidden places in your own soul. After all, the true barrier is never concrete. It is the fortress of your own consciousness. Brace yourself for the next revelation, how to freeze you on command and bend time inside your very veins. You step into a sterile chamber with no windows, the hum of fluorescent lights drowning out the rain on the rooftop. Electrodes cling to your arms like silent predators, and a pair of scientists exchange glances as you settle onto the reclining chair. You feel tension in every muscle, your heart beat a wild drum echoing in your ears. Then a voice crackles over a speaker, calm and impersonal, uttering a single command you barely hear. Immediately your limbs lock. Your mind screams to run, but your body refuses. You are frozen at will, stripped of motion by an invisible hand, welcome to the edge of human control. It began with 19th century researchers who noticed a curious reaction in dogs. When threatened or startled, their subjects would sometimes go rigid, eyes wide and unblinking, a living statue in a moment of terror. Pavlov wrote about this immobilization as a reflexive response to overwhelming stimuli, yet he treated it as a footnote to salivation experiments. He never imagined that this freeze reflex could be isolated, packaged, and used intentionally against living beings. But even then, the seeds of a darker possibility were planted, the idea that freezing motion could be mastered like any other conditioned behavior. In the depths of Cold War paranoia, Soviet military labs turned theory into reality. Scientists experimented on soldiers and prisoners using hypnosis, electrical pulses, and sensory overload to train subjects to freeze at specific prompts. A sharp metallic tone, a key phrase whispered in their ear, or a flash of light could halt every muscle, suspending human agency in an instant. Witness accounts speak of recruits standing stock still, terrified faces locked in a silent scream, until the technician released the trigger. They tracked heart rates as proof that subjects remained conscious but utterly paralyzed. Across the ocean, agencies in the United States saw potential in this unsettling power. Under highly classified programs, researchers tried to replicate and refine the freeze response. Codenamed phase arrest, protocols combined subliminal messaging with low-frequency sound waves aimed at the temporal lobes. Volunteers reported an eerie calm before their bodies locked up completely, as if every nerve fiber refused instruction from the brain. Field tests involved small groups of handlers covertly issuing commands to unaware targets. A whispered phrase in a crowded room, and the chosen individual would collapse into immobility, a perfect witness unable to act or flee. Declassified files tell the story of an operative in Berlin who froze mid-stim in a busy square. He had blended seamlessly into the crowd, trailing a suspect through narrow streets. Then a hidden transmitter crackled a trigger phrase into his earpiece. His coffee cup hung in the air, his eyes locked on a passerby. He could not move his legs. For a heart stopping 12 seconds, he was a statue, a man trapped in his own limbs. The suspect vanished into the subway. When agency doctors finally reversed the effect, the agent was left trembling, haunted by the moment he lost control entirely. Interrogation units recognized the tactical advantage. Why use brute force when you could simply command someone to obey? Prisoners conditioned to freeze would stand motionless while questions poured in, unable to resist or flee. Threats and promises rattled at the edges of their awareness, but their bodies remained locked. Some operators spoke of easing subjects into compliance by alternating freeze commands with reassuring words, creating a bizarre dance of control and release. Evidence suggests such techniques were tested in secret overseas facilities, leaving survivors with fragmented memories and the terror of being silenced without violence. But mastery of the freeze response came at a terrible cost. Many subjects suffered post-traumatic stress, their bodies triggered by everyday noises and words. A ringing doorbell, a stranger's greeting. Some found themselves immobilized at home or in the street, terrified by phantom commands they could not explain. Families abandoned loved ones who became unpredictable time bombs of paralysis. Researchers sometimes lost track of who they had conditioned, leaving individuals forever vulnerable to accidental triggers. The very power that promised control ultimately slipped into chaos, revealing a horrifying truth about meddling with human will. Beyond the laboratory and battlefield, these experiments expose a universal vulnerability. Our bodies are machines subject to outside programming. Our muscles respond to commands faster than our conscious mind can intervene. A well-placed stimulus can hijack reflexes, bypassing thought entirely. It is a reminder that autonomy is fragile, that beneath our skin lies a network of conditioned responses waiting to be activated. If governments and shadowy organizations can train people to freeze like statues, what other hidden levers of control might they discover next? This dark potential challenges everything we believe about free will. You may think it is confined to remote labs and secret files hidden behind cryptic labels. But glimpses of this power touch everyday life. Have you ever blanked out, unable to move when panic surged through you. That moment reveals the same circuitry, the same potential for outside forces to exploit. Modern advertising and media messages tug at emotional reflexes, freezing critical thought long enough to install ideas without resistance. If you remain unaware of these invisible triggers, you could be controlled not by direct commands but by subtle manipulations that induce your own mental paralysis. If immobilizing your very body with a single phrase sent shivers down your spine, imagine what awaits when they learn to bend reality's rules. Have you ever stared at a bent spoon, feeling its metal grain shift under the slightest pressure, and wondered what would happen if you could bend it without touching it at all? Imagine the faint warmth of your fingertips hovering inches above the metal as it creaks and warps in slow motion under the command of your mind. The taste of metal seems to fill the air, the spoon's arc reflecting the dim light like a warped mirror. It sounds like stagecraft, trickery spun for applause, but hidden in secret laboratories. Scientists once tested this possibility under strict conditions, and what they uncovered shattered the fragile barrier between imagination and matter. Picture yourself in a windowless room, heart thudding as you explain the layout of an underground facility you have never visited. In the 1970s, at the ultra-secret Stanford Research Institute, researchers blindfolded volunteers and asked them to describe targets located thousands of miles away. Sketches emerged of Soviet military bases, precise enough to match top-secret satellite imagery. Every correctly identified wall and building became a crack in the notion that the mind is confined to the skull. These were not anecdotal tales told around a campfire. Teams of statisticians pored over data, tracking hits and misses. Projects like Stargate, bankrolled by military budgets, poured millions into exploring the strange ability to see without eyes and sense without senses. While mainstream science recoiled, secret memos quietly acknowledged that consciousness might reach beyond flesh and wire. Then came the metal-bending demonstrations. Uri Geller, under laboratory scrutiny, twisted spoons in the hands of astonished physicists. The stress lines in the metal matched those of conventional bending, but no heat, no pliers, no overt force had been applied. Cameras rolled, sensors recorded minute temperature changes, and yet the spoon bent. Repeated trials, controls in place, left no easy escape for skeptics. Meanwhile, in hidden basements from Europe to Asia, volunteers sat before random number generators, humming softly on a table. These devices, designed to spit out a chaotic stream of zeros and ones, were thought immune to human influence. But when concentrated intention was applied, the pattern skewed. What should have been perfect randomness buckled under the insistence of thought. Feel the hum of that tiny box. Inside, electrons flicker like restless fireflies, flipping aimlessly until you decide otherwise. You focus your attention, willing the machine to favor one outcome. Slowly, subtly, the sequence curves in your favor. It is as if reality itself is a river, and your mind can alter its course. And then there is the most unsettling discovery of all, that the act of looking can change what is there. In quantum physics, particles travel like ghostly waves until they are observed, collapsing into concrete positions, only when your gaze falls upon them. It is the ultimate experiment, showing you that consciousness may not merely record the universe, but actually write its script. Imagine yourself standing before a dark screen, tiny sparks dancing across it. You watch, curious, and those sparks organize into patterns you have chosen. A chill runs down your spine as you realize that the boundary between the watcher and the watched is an illusion. Of course, not all revelations come from machines or subatomic particles. Classic psychology experiments revealed that belief alone can heal the body. Patients given sugar pills, assured they contained powerful medicine, experienced genuine relief, some even showing measurable improvements in brain scans. You heal yourself by convincing your brain that healing is underway, collapsing the barrier between mind and flesh. Even prayer studies have shown groups focusing intent on distant patients can influence recovery rates. Hospital stays shorten, complications ease, and yet no one can trace a physical conduit for this power. It is a whisper traveling through the weave of consciousness itself. Here is the mid-story key you cannot ignore. Every boundary you believe in exists only because you accept it. Every limitation, every barrier, every rule etched in your mind shapes the confines of your world. But what if you could redraw those lines simply by shifting your belief? You might dismiss this as fantasy, reserved for the gifted or the mad, yet the raw ingredient of this power is attention, focus, expectation. When you lock onto an outcome, tiny ripples form in the sea of possibility, nudging events toward your will. A single thought can resonate outward, amplifying into a wave that reshapes distant shores. This realization is both exhilarating and terrifying. To bend reality's rules is to hold a pair of shears to the very fabric of existence. Every thought becomes an act of creation or destruction. Hold that weight in your hands for a moment and feel its gravity. So stand now on the precipice between what you once thought was fixed and the limitless realm of what could be. Feel the electric tension in the air as probabilities fold and unfold under the pressure of your will. Your mind is not just a passive witness, it is an active participant in the dance of existence. You bend reality's rules not through brute force, but through the quiet, relentless insistence of attention and intent. Once you accept that consciousness shapes the world, there is no turning back. Now prepare to discover how you split your awareness in ways that defy every instinct you thought you understood. Have you ever felt your mind stretch so thin, it almost tears itself in half, as though every thought were fraying at the edges and slipping away, pulled in two opposite directions? What if you could deliberately wrest those fraying edges apart, sending your awareness in two directions at once, straddling parallel streams of perception inside your own skull? That was the promise posed by covert experiments, designed to fracture consciousness and reveal hidden powers you never knew you possessed. Picture yourself led into a windowless chamber, the air thick with the hum of hidden electronics. Electrodes, sticky and cold, are pressed against your temples. A flickering red light dances in one corner of your vision, while a steady blue glow pulses in the opposite. A calm voice, smooth as silk, speaks through a headset. Focus on the red. Now shift to the blue. Now feel both. You obey, at first cautiously, then with growing curiosity, as the voice guides you into splitting your attention like a hypnotist, dividing a crowd into segments. The first exercise seems innocuous. Follow two patterns simultaneously. But soon the red flash and the blue pulse become distinct realities. You describe each in turn. The red burns hot, urgent, demanding, you whisper. The blue soothes, distant, almost comforting. Then the real test begins. You're told to see them both at once, to witness each without abandoning the other. Your heartbeat accelerates, your palms slick with sweat as your brain strains to hold two truths at once. It's deceptively simple and utterly impossible. Then they introduce sound. A whispered secret in your left ear, a ticking clock in your right. You attempt to transcribe both, your tongue stumbling over words that feel unmoored. Each channel competes for your attention, threatening to pull you apart from the inside. In that moment, you aren't just listening, you are two listeners, two selves, occupying the same head with separate agendas. A strange exhilaration overtakes you, mingled with a growing sense of vertigo. As the exercises deepen, you learn to shift the balance like a tightrope walker redistributing weight. One moment, you hover at the edge of the red's urgency. The next, you sink into the blue's calm. Then you hover between them, a trembling fulcrum of awareness, observing each sensation as an outsider. Your mind becomes a theater with two spotlights, one trained on the here and now, the other rifling through memories, desires, hidden fears. What you experience feels like a revelation. Consciousness is not a single beam, but a cluster of flickers you can learn to control. The experimenters love to quote the spotlight model of attention, the idea that your mind illuminates only a tiny patch of the vast scenery inside your skull. But here, under their guidance, you become the spotlight itself, capable of splitting, redirecting, and even dimming one beam while brightening another. Yet the cost is steep. You begin to sense the thin membrane between sanity and fragmentation. Every split focus leaves a faint echo, a distortion that tinges your thoughts with uncertainty. After the session, you walk out into daylight feeling unsteady, as if you've spent hours suspended between two worlds. Voices in ordinary conversations sound layered, two separate dialogues playing at once. Simple decisions, what to eat, where to walk, feel laden with echoes of red and blue, urgent and calm, each vying for dominance. Some subjects never fully recover. They report a lingering sensation of watching themselves from above, an uncanny detachment that blurs their sense of self. A few claim they can recreate the split at will, reading a book with one half of the mind, while the other daydreams in vivid parallel scenes. They describe it as a gift and a curse, a strange superpower to run two mental marathons at once, shadowed by the fear that one day the two halves won't find their way back to unity. These experiments remain secret for decades, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic secrecy and professional respectability. Yet the implications are impossible to ignore. If you can split your awareness, you can overload other minds, send conflicting instructions to collaborators, or hide secrets in one channel while another performs on cue. You could move through the world wearing multiple masks, each half of your awareness engaged in tasks invisible to the other. But here's the deeper horror. By fracturing your own mind, you unearth the fragile scaffolding that holds your identity together. Morality, memory, even the simple feeling of being present in the moment, all begin to feel like illusions stitched together by a mind desperate for coherence. You realize that every choice, every thought, every flicker of attention depends on this seamless unity. Once it cracks, you see how tenuous reality really is. And perhaps that's the true experiment, not splitting your awareness at their command, but confronting what happens when you split it yourself. The secret power granted in those hidden laboratories reveals a darker truth, that your mind, the very essence of who you are, is nothing more than a balancing act between competing forces. Just when you thought dividing your consciousness was the final frontier, you'll discover how your body can be commanded to blink on cue without your conscious consent. Your eyelids flutter, and every blink feels like a tremor in your mind's control center. You try to think of blinking as accidental, spontaneous, a harmless reflex. But what if I told you someone can pull the strings behind that simple gesture? In a dimly lit lab, electrodes taped against your temple record patterns you never knew existed. A gentle zap of electricity courses through your brain, and without warning, you blink on cue. No thought involved, no protest possible. Your body obeys before your mind even registers the command. Decades ago, researchers discovered that blinking could be conditioned, just like Pavlov's dogs salivated at a bell. Only here, it wasn't drool, but a shield against an air puff aimed at their eyes. A tone paired repeatedly with that sting of wind became the signal to close the lids. Soon the dogs blinked at the sound alone, anticipating discomfort without knowing why. If a simple noise can hijack your most reflexive act, what else lies waiting to be commandeered? Later, neuroscientists took it further. They placed subjects in MRI machines while asking them to blink at will. What they found was staggering. Seconds before the conscious decision, hidden patterns of neural firings foreshadowed the eyelid's descent. Your brain decided long before you did. You think you chose to blink, but in truth, you were following a script already written in your neurons. And that shatters something deep inside you. You like to believe you're the author of your actions, free will intact. But when your body moves before your mind wakes up, the illusion falls away. You're left staring into a void where choice should be, realizing autonomy is thinner than you ever dared imagine. Then came transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, the startling breakthrough that lets a magnetic coil placed on the skull force your eyes shut. No warning, no permission. A pulse of magnetic energy, and your blink reflex fires off like a gunshot. You cannot resist, you cannot override it. Your eyelids capitulate, as though someone pulled an invisible lever inside your head. In that moment, you are both actor and puppet, trapped in a scene you never auditioned for. But the hidden powers stretch beyond machines. Your blink reacts to subtle social cues too. A friend raises an eyebrow, glances away, or smiles, and you blink in sympathy. Mirror neurons whisper silent instructions. Close your eyes like I am closing mine. You become an echo, a living testament to the fact that even your basic physiology is wired to follow the patterns of others. Advertisers have noticed this. Of course, trailers flash images timed to coincide with your natural blink rhythm, burying subliminal messages in the split-second darkness. You never see these frames, yet your brain absorbs them, embedding suggestions before you're even aware. Blink once, and a brand slogan slides into your subconscious. Blink again, and a mood lifts or sours, all orchestrated without your knowledge. Imagine now a theater of social manipulation, where blinking is just the overture. Political orators study your blinking patterns, learning when to pause, when to speak, how to guide your attention. A slight hesitation before a promise, a deliberate pause before a question. Your blink betrays your doubt, and they adjust their tone until you nod in agreement. You blink in approval, convinced it was your own conviction. This is more than a curiosity experiment. This is more than a curiosity experiment. It's a profound lesson in vulnerability. That tiny involuntary gesture binds you to networks of influence far beyond the blink of an eye. Recognizing this is terrifying because it means every twitch, every flicker of your eyelid, every moment you close your eyes can be co-opted, predicted, or compelled. And yet, acknowledging this fragile autonomy is the first step toward reclaiming it. The blink is the smallest sign of life, the most intimate perforation between awareness and oblivion. When you understand how easily it can be hijacked, you start to see the blueprint of control etched throughout your body and mind. You're not just blinking, you're participating in a silent dialogue with hidden powers that shape your reality. Your blink is their signal, your compliance their quiet victory. But now you know. You feel the weight of each eyelid's descent, as though it carries the gravity of lost freedom. Get ready to see how the tiniest shift can stretch the very edge of time itself. In the eye of a broken clock, seconds fracture and shapeshift around you. Here, time obeys no rules. A single heartbeat can stretch into a minute. A breath can echo like a lifetime. In a secret laboratory, scientists once coaxed your mind to wander beyond the normal flow, stretching moments until each tick of the clock screamed in your veins. They strapped you into a padded chamber, sealed your senses away, and whispered instructions to dissolve the barrier between now and forever. You didn't ask for permission. You didn't question what they might discover. You simply felt time loosen its grip and watched yourself fall. You lie still as electrodes press against your skin. Each nerve ending hums with electric tremors. A low-frequency pulse vibrates through your skull. Your pupils dilate. Time stretches. You feel milliseconds expand like rubber bands, warping into seconds. What was once a flicker of light becomes a slow, unfurling bloom of luminescence. Scientists record your brainwaves, the spiking theta, the drifting alpha, as proof that time is malleable in the theater of the mind. You are both spectator and star in this unholy performance, straddling the edge of a temporal abyss. They called it Project Kronos, a whispered myth among clandestine agencies. Under the cover of darkness, you were dosed with experimental compounds, psychoactive molecules designed to fracture your temporal cortex. LSD analogues, DMT derivatives, substances not found in any textbook. When the chemicals took hold, you entered a hall of mirrors where every moment rippled outward, echoing through corridors of memory and imagination. A second might feel like an hour of vivid dreams. Every sensation lingers, the hum of fluorescent lights becomes a symphony. Even the act of blinking stretches into an odyssey of thought. You glide along the razor's edge of conscious time. But the physical trials were only the beginning. In zero-gravity flights, technicians sent you soaring on parabolic arcs, ordering you to press a button the instant you perceived a target. Pilots trained under stimulants learned to anticipate enemy missiles in fractions of a second. You, strapped to a gurney, experienced your own moments of fleeting premonition, as though time itself whispered clues before unfolding. Each action potential fired in your brain felt like a tidal wave, cresting and collapsing in slow motion. You wondered if your mind can slow time. Can it bend it? Can it break it? Or will you shatter first? Between sessions, you returned to the world, a wounded traveler stumbling through normal hours. Ordinary days felt unbearable. Coffee dripped in slow motion. Conversations echoed like distant thunder underwater. You felt alien, untethered. Friends laughed, unaware that for you, their words landed in a muddy pool of elongated frames. You questioned every clock, every calendar was objective time, an illusion. Or had you simply cracked open a hidden chamber of perception, peering into something no human was meant to see? The boundary between experiment and madness blurred. You began to fear that your own mind had become the ultimate instrument of torture, playing tricks on the fabric of existence. At the apex of Project Kronos, they introduced virtual reality immersion. Inside the headset, you wandered through abandoned cathedrals where sunlight poured in stuttering beams, each glance revealing centuries in miniature. A single step echoed through the ages. Algorithms adapted to your neural feedback, amplifying the distortion until you could taste the past and future. A creaking beam overhead resonated as if hammered by time itself. You felt every grain of dust suspended between ticks, each particle tracing its own slow dance. It was divine, and it was terrifying. You touched the raw edges of time and discovered how thin the veil truly was. Yet for every revelation came a cost. Sleepless nights haunted by phantom time loops. Your dreams folded and unfolded like origami, unpredictable and sharp. You woke screaming, convinced you had lived multiple lives in a single slumber. You doubted your own timeline. Memories tangled between what was recorded and what was imagined. You questioned your identity. If time is not fixed, what anchors you? The experiment stripped away everything steady until you felt weightless in your own life. It's said that some subjects lost years in the distortion, returning to find calendars flipped, relationships fractured, opportunities vanished. There was one final test. A massive pendulum was set swinging above your head, its blade glinting cold steel. You were told to predict the moment it would pass before slicing through a line drawn at your waist. In ordinary conditions, anyone could guess within a few milliseconds. You nailed it. Time slowing to a crawl, giving you a perfect, deadly preview. You caught the pattern, the swing, the electric hum in the air, and in that moment, the blade wasn't just metal, it was time itself made manifest, an instrument you could dance around. But it also reminded you how close you were to being cut. Afterward, you sat in a silent room, heart pounding, caught between triumph and terror. You had stretched time's edge, hovered on the brink of infinite perception, but you also tasted its void. You glimpsed the emptiness beyond the ticking of clocks, the stark truth that time only exists because you believe it does. The experimenters logged every data point, but you carried the scars, phantom expansions of moments, echoes that whispered every time you checked your watch. You lived knowing that time can bend, break, and bleed, and that your mind is both key and cage. Now, the revelations of Project Kronos remain classified, buried under layers of secrecy. Official reports mention only performance enhancements and reaction speeds. But in the quiet spaces between seconds, you know the truth. Time is not an arrow. It is a rubber band, stretching and recoiling at the whims of consciousness. You are both its prisoner and its master, forever changed by that fleeting mastery. And as you walk away, you feel a tremor in every tick of the clock, a question that refuses to fade. If you can stretch the edge of time, what happens when that edge snaps? In that distorted moment, you sense the first tremor before you lose your balance.
Close your eyes. Imagine stepping onto a narrow plank that stretches over a yawning void. A cold wind brushes your ankles. The ground seems to tilt beneath you. You shift your weight and feel the world blur. That moment when everything you trusted vanishes. That is the moment they studied. In a hidden lab, volunteers were strapped to a chair that spun like a broken carousel. Mirrors circled around them, reflecting fragmented versions of their faces. Electrodes hummed against their skin, waiting to tangle their inner ears with electric pulses. The moment the current hit, their bodies betrayed them. They staggered, swayed, and slid into uncharted territory where fear and revelation collided. When your body fights to stay upright, your mind unlocks doors you never knew existed. Gallon after gallon of vertigo flooding your skull, a storm that drowns out ordinary thought. In that chaos, participants reported bursts of clarity, visions of geometric patterns swirling like cosmic galaxies, whispers that felt like memories not yet made. They heard voices as if the lab walls were porous, bleeding secrets from beyond. And some claimed they felt other people's pain as sharply as their own, a hidden empathy ignited by the struggle for balance. Scientists watched in awe as brain scans lit up abandoned regions, pathways that lay dormant until provoked by imbalance. In another wing, subjects floated in darkness. They slipped into isolation tanks, bodies cradled by salt water, ears submerged in silence. For days, they drifted between wakefulness and dream, losing track of where their bodies ended and the water began. When they emerged, some spoke of floating through alien landscapes, of singing stars and trees that sang back. Others whispered of meeting themselves, versions shaped by fears and hopes, living out choices never taken. This was not fiction. It was recorded, the bleeding edges of perception, where the mind, stripped of gravity, found gravity in the ghostly echoes of consciousness.
What if losing your physical balance is simply the key to rebalancing your inner world? Have you ever felt that panic when the ground gives way, the instant your brain hits panic mode? That lurch, that catch in your chest, this is what they triggered with galvanic vestibular stimulation, zapping the inner ear until the volunteer felt they were falling through space while lying perfectly still. And then came the uncanny abilities, identifying the direction of hidden sounds with devastating precision, sensing the approach of unseen figures, mapping a room by subtle shifts in their own orientation. The mind slices through the noise when it has no choice but to cling to something solid. They even tested synchrony. Blindfolded volunteers walked a narrow beam while listening to rhythmic patterns in their head. Soon their feet tapped in time with patterns they had not yet heard, muscles tensing before the next signal arrived. They moved like dancers choreographed by invisible hands. The balance tests were not just about falling, they were about discovering how finely tuned your instincts could be when the usual sensory anchors failed. Soldiers underwent similar trials. They stood on unstable platforms, barrels rolling beneath their boots, while instructors whispered threats into their ears. Fatigue set in, muscles burned, but their senses awoke. They claimed to see shadows skitter in peripheral vision, to hear pulses in the ground before explosions, to sense life signs through layers of concrete. These were not superpowers conjured by fantasy. They were echoes of heightened perception, roused by sensory disarray. But losing balance goes beyond the physical. It fractures your moral equilibrium, forcing you to question certainties you once held. In the crucible of vertigo, your sense of self loosens. What if you applied this same disorientation to belief, to prejudice, to fear? When the familiar ground of conviction tilts, you might find compassion where you expected contempt, or courage where you expected panic. When your world is unraveled, your hidden strengths weave together a new tapestry of possibility. Imagine living in that state of constant flux. Every step a negotiation with gravity. Every heartbeat a code to be cracked. Instead of fearing the stumble, you learn to ride the sway. You tune yourself to whispers in the breeze, to tremors beneath your feet, to the resonance of your own shadow. Balance becomes not a fixed point, but a dance, a conversation between your senses and the world's hidden frequencies. And this is the true secret experiment, not the lab tests or the isolated tanks, but the experiment of your own life. The moment you stop clinging to certainty, you open yourself to fresh horizons. You lose your balance, and in losing it, you gain an unshakable awareness. Your senses sharpen. Your fears become guides. Your mind expands into the space between moments, where the hidden powers of perception lie, waiting. But only when you wake the unknown will you understand the true power hidden in the depths of imbalance. You wake to darkness pressing against your eyelids, a cold hum vibrating under your skin. The air tastes metallic, and your senses feel frayed, as though the boundary between you and the world has thinned. Somewhere above your head, a harsh light pulses, rhythmically, like a heartbeat borrowed from someone whose chest you can't see. You lie still, guessing how you arrived here. Your memory is a shattered mirror, reflecting only shards of panic and confusion. You try to speak, but no sound comes. Instead, a whisper ricochets behind your eyes, as if your own mind has learned to be silent and listen. Your limbs feel heavy straps, clamped in place by unseen hands. Far off, voices murmur through speakers, clinical and curious. They call out codes, reference files, speak of variables and control groups, as though you were nothing more than a data point.
Yet, as you struggle against your restraints, a strange warmth gathers at the base of your skull, humming with something alive. A memory, perhaps. A power. You can't tell which. It flickers like a candle in a breeze, threatening to extinguish or to ignite something monstrous. A screen flickers into view, its glow revealing a laboratory cage of mirrors. Monitors display brain scans that dance with electric blue and violet. Those images belong to you, or at least your template modified, tampered with, molded by procedures you never asked for. They've drilled you, zapped you, coaxed synapses into igniting. They sought to awaken what sleeps in every human, hidden capabilities, buried under layers of learned helplessness and conformity. They wanted to push you beyond the horizon of normal perception, beyond the comfortable limits of your own mind, and then it happens. You feel it first as a murmur in your veins, a slow pulse that grows into a wave of energy. Your vision sharpens, colors edge with intensity, outlines shimmer. The world and you move closer together, no longer separate. You reach toward a flickering reflection in the glass, but your hand ghosts through it like mist. Yet the barrier feels fragile, as though a thought could shatter it. You find yourself smiling at the absurdity of believing the impossible wasn't always possible. Fear and fascination wrestle inside you. Fear of the unknown surging through your veins, fascination at the raw power humming beneath your skin. The scientists call it anomaly. Some call it awakening. You call it terrifyingly alive. Every memory you've ever buried is echoed now in electric pulses. Every fear, every desire thrums with new potential. You sense patterns in the air, vibrations in thought, threads of intention weaving through the silence. You're beginning to read the world as a code, not a fixed stage. They press buttons, note blips on graphs, speak in hushed exultation. You're their greatest triumph, their proof that the unknown can be pried open. But as you lie there, consciousness stretching like taffy, you realize you're more than a test subject. You're an origin point, a gateway. Their experiment has succeeded only partially, because what they woke cannot be contained in tubes or numbers. It only waits for you to step into the darkness you once called nothing. Your heart pounds in your throat as the unknown breathes with you. You feel conviction coiled like a serpent beneath your ribs. They intended to use you, control you, maybe weaponize you. But control is a fragile illusion in the face of raw awareness. The more you know, the less their walls, their restraints, their lab coats matter. The wires attached to your temples flicker and spark. You realize you could tear them free with a thought. You realize you could bend this entire facility to your will. In that moment, a shudder rolls through your mind. You sense the unknown stirring, like an ocean roused by a storm. You glimpse possibilities that shatter certainty, currents of consciousness beyond your body, voices whispered on the wind of collective thought. You smell the ozone of electric synapses firing, taste the sharp tang of power newly discovered. You're no longer prey, you're the predator. You're the catalyst that will break the fragile cage of human limitation. And still, beneath the awe and terror, a question coils like smoke. Who will you become now that the unknown wakes within you? A savior, a destroyer, a doorway between worlds. You've crossed a threshold, and there's no turning back. Every breath you draw feeds the void and the light at once. The experiment that sought to expose hidden powers has succeeded too well, unveiling the greatest secret of all. You were never meant to be the same again. Soon, you will discover what it truly means when you obey the voice echoing in your awakened mind. You hear it more often than you realize. The voice that tells you what to do, what to believe, who to be. And without thinking, you listen. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It speaks in authority, in certainty, in calm instruction. And somehow, without force, without threat, it moves you. Not just your choices, your conscience. You obey the voice. It starts early. The teacher tells you to sit still, to raise your hand, to wait your turn. You do. Not because it makes sense, but because that's the voice. The doctor says you're healthy or sick, and you believe them instantly, even if something inside you protests. The voice knows better. It always knows better. But what happens when the voice is wrong? Stanley Milgram tried to answer that. In one of the most disturbing psychological experiments ever conducted, participants were told to administer electric shocks to a stranger, just because a man in a lab coat told them to. The shocks weren't real, but the participants didn't know that. They heard screams, pleas, silence, and still many obeyed. They obeyed the voice, because it came from a figure of authority, a scientist, a man with a clipboard. That was enough. Rational, ordinary people delivered what they believed were fatal shocks, not because they wanted to, but because they were told to. And they didn't stop, even when they were trembling, even when they questioned it, even when they cried. They weren't monsters. They were just people who had learned their entire lives to trust the voice. And that's the terrifying part. Not that obedience exists, but how automatic it is, how deeply embedded, how you can be manipulated into doing things that violate your morals just because someone sounds like they know what they're doing. You want to believe you'd be different, that you'd say no, refuse, walk away, but you forget. You already obey. You follow traffic signals, tax instructions, social scripts. You adjust your tone when speaking to someone with a title. You silence your instincts when someone with confidence contradicts them. You mistake authority for accuracy, power for truth. And the voice doesn't always come from outside. Sometimes it becomes internal, a lifetime of instructions echoing in your own mind. Don't stand out. Don't speak up. Don't question. You think it's your voice, but it isn't. It was planted there, grown from years of compliance. Because the voice doesn't just command your actions, it trains your mind. It shapes your identity. Obedience becomes self-sustaining. You don't need the lab coat anymore. You carry it with you, in your judgments, in your fears, in your silence. And that silence is where the voice lives strongest, not in the orders it gives, but in the questions it never lets you ask. You obey the voice because disobedience feels dangerous, because stepping out of line means stepping out alone, because the voice doesn't need to argue. It just needs you to keep listening, and you do, even now. But what if the voice isn't even real? What if it's just suggestion, and you're bending without even realizing you've been touched? You're walking down a hallway. A researcher greets you with a smile. The room is sterile, lit by humming fluorescents, the air faintly metallic. You're here for a memory test, or so you're told. You're handed a sheet with a list of words. You read them, you memorize. Simple enough, then the experiment begins. A few questions, some feedback, a quiet nod of approval here, a subtle eyebrow raise there. And before you even notice, your answers begin to change. You don't realize it yet, but your mind is no longer yours. It's bending, warping, adapting to invisible pressures you can't even detect. This isn't mind control in the sci-fi sense. There are no wires, no machines, no flashing lights, just words, just tone, just suggestion. And that's what makes it terrifying. Because you think you make your own choices. You think your thoughts are original, your opinions hard-earned. But in reality, your brain is a sponge, soaking up cues from your environment, your peers, the slightest inflections of authority. One look, one phrase, one hint of expectation, and you conform. This is the legacy of experiments like those by Solomon Asch, where people denied the evidence of their own eyes just to fit in with a group. Or Milgram's study, where ordinary individuals shocked strangers to the point of screams, simply because someone in a lab coat told them to. And here's the most disturbing part. They weren't coerced. They were suggested. Suggestion is a scalpel that slices beneath your awareness. It doesn't confront, it whispers. It doesn't argue, it implies. And you follow. You're more likely to believe something if it's said confidently. You're more likely to agree if everyone else nods. You're more likely to forget a truth if someone says, "That's not how I remember it." This isn't weakness. This is design. Your brain evolved to be social, to read signals, to fit in. Being outcast meant death, so your mind learned to prioritize belonging over accuracy, survival over truth. Even now, in modern life, you obey that ancient wiring. You smile when you're uncomfortable. You laugh when things aren't funny. You agree when you shouldn't. And you justify it all after the fact, convincing yourself that it was your idea, but it wasn't. You were nudged, prompted, guided. And the scariest thing, you liked it. You liked the safety. You liked being told you were right. You liked the feeling of approval, of certainty. That's how suggestion hooks into you. Not with force, with comfort. And the deeper danger is this: if your beliefs can be shaped this easily, what else is false? How many of your convictions are real? How many are echoes of someone else's voice, repeated enough times that they became your own? You bend to suggestion, not because you're gullible, but because you're human. You crave certainty, direction, belonging, and those cravings make you manipulable. So ask yourself now, what thoughts are truly yours? What opinions were planted? What memories were edited? And if you can't tell the difference, how would you ever know? Now imagine hearing something so profound, so disorienting, that it's not even a sound at all. It starts as a hum, faint, barely there. Not outside, but inside you. You think it's just silence, but it isn't. It's denser, like pressure behind your eyes. Like something waiting. Most people never hear it, because most people never sit still long enough. But in moments of true stillness, when your phone is off, your distractions silenced, your breath the only sound, you'll notice it. That weight, that subtle frequency. Not sound, not thought, but something in between. It's the silence underneath noise, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. Because silence isn't empty. It's alive. Years ago, government-funded sensory deprivation experiments tested what happens when you remove all stimuli. Subjects floated in tanks, suspended in darkness, surrounded by absolute quiet. No light, no touch, no sound. Within minutes, the mind began to unravel. Not from fear, but from exposure. They didn't hallucinate because they were scared. They hallucinated because the brain, in the absence of input, creates its own reality. It projects. It fills the void, because the mind cannot tolerate silence. Why? Because in silence, there's no distraction, no mask, no performance. You hear what's been waiting beneath every conversation, every laugh, every lie. Your unfiltered self, the raw core of your awareness. The truth that normally gets drowned in noise. And that truth, it terrifies you. You think silence is peaceful, but true silence confronts. It corners you with your own voice, not the one you speak with, but the one that whispers beneath your thoughts, the one that knows what you really want, what you really fear, who you really are when nobody's looking. That's why we run from it. That's why we fill every gap with music, podcasts, chatter, screens, not to be entertained, but to be protected from silence. Because silence reveals, and what it reveals is dangerous. Not to you, to them. Because silence teaches you to hear patterns, to detect falsehood. In quiet, you begin to notice the shape of influence, how your desires were planted, how your fears were conditioned, how the world was shaped not to serve you, but to use you. This is why the experiments were shut down. The subjects weren't just disoriented. They started to wake up, to report clarity, as if silence stripped away the lies they'd been living under, as if their thoughts, once unplugged from the machine, became lucid. What if that's the hidden power? What if silence isn't emptiness, but access? Access to something buried, a layer of consciousness not reachable through speech or thought, a transmission always broadcasting, just too quiet to hear over the noise of daily life. You start to realize silence doesn't speak with words. It speaks with knowing, with memory too deep to name. Maybe that's why ancient mystics sat in caves, why prophets wandered deserts, why monks retreat into silence, not to escape the world, but to decode it, to receive signals too subtle for noise to carry. Truth doesn't scream, it waits. And if you dare to wait with it, it will show you everything. You'll hear the manipulation in marketing, the emptiness behind applause, the hollowness of words repeated too many times without meaning. Silence will reveal who's pretending, including you. But the moment you open your mouth to explain it, it's gone. That's the curse. Silence doesn't survive translation. It can't be taught. It must be heard. So the next time you're alone in quiet, don't flinch. Don't fill the gap. Let the silence press against your skin. Let it break your routine. Let it whisper what the noise has hidden from you all your life. Because if you listen closely enough, silence will show you how they control you. And once you know that, you'll start to mirror their movements. You're sitting across from someone. They lift their coffee. A few seconds later, you do the same. They scratch their face, and you feel an itch rise on yours. You lean in when they lean in. You nod when they nod. You think it's nothing, just coincidence. But it isn't. You're mirroring them. And what's disturbing isn't that it happens, it's that you don't even know you're doing it. Scientists call it the chameleon effect. You become them, piece by piece. Not because you want to, but because something inside you is wired to obey, to adapt, to conform. The shape of your body, your tone, your expressions, they all start to reflect whoever you're with. You shift without permission, without awareness. It was supposed to be a survival mechanism, a way to blend in, to belong. In ancient times, it meant safety. The tribe accepted those who moved like the tribe. Those who didn't, exiled, alone, vulnerable. So your brain learned, match the rhythm, echo the gestures, disappear into the group. But in a modern world, that ancient instinct is still active, still shaping you, still bending your identity to whoever stands closest. You don't realize how deeply it runs until you step back and watch. Watch how people in elevators mimic each other's stance. How laughter spreads in waves at parties, not from humor, but from mimicry. How outrage multiplies online, one person enraged, then another, then thousands, all mirroring emotional tone without questioning the origin. This isn't just body language, it's belief, it's behavior, it's identity. You mirror not just movements, but morals. You adopt the fear in their voice, the certainty in their eyes. You start to believe what they believe, not because it's true, but because it's familiar, because it's reflected. This is how crowds move, how cults form, how entire populations embrace ideas that in isolation would repulse them. You don't think your way into the group. You feel your way in. You sink, you shift, you surrender. And the truly disturbing part, you still think you're an individual. Mirroring makes you feel connected, safe. It tells you you're not alone, but it also erodes you, quietly. It rewrites the self until nothing original remains. Just a hollow echo of everyone you've mirrored. And it gets worse. Because once someone knows this, they can use it. Politicians, marketers, manipulators, they lean in, they nod, they use familiar cadences. They mirror you first, because they know you'll mirror them back. And once you do, once the rhythm is shared, your defenses drop. You trust them, not because of logic, but because they move like you. This is how influence works. It doesn't start with facts. It starts with gestures, eye contact, breathing patterns, micro-expressions. And before you even realize it, you're agreeing, obeying, conforming. But here's the paradox. You also mirror goodness, compassion, courage. If someone stands strong, you might mirror that strength. If someone resists, you might mirror that defiance. The same reflex that makes you vulnerable can make you powerful. So the question is, who are you facing? What rhythm are you absorbing? What posture are you unconsciously adopting? If you're surrounded by fear, you become fearful. If you're surrounded by hate, you harden. But if you're surrounded by truth, by stillness, by clarity, you start to mirror that too. And maybe the scariest thing of all is realizing you've spent your entire life unconsciously copying people who don't even know who they are. Break the mirror. Sit still. Watch how your body wants to move when someone else moves. And in that gap, in that tiny pause, you'll find the beginning of autonomy. Because the real self doesn't copy. It creates. But first, you must catch yourself mid-mimic. Mid-nod, mid-agreement. You have to feel the strings pulling you and decide not to dance. And what happens when you stop mirroring and start moving in a way that shocks the system? There's a moment right after impact when everything you thought you knew shatters, not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. You don't scream, you don't cry, you freeze. Because the brain can't process a reality it didn't expect. And that moment, that rupture, that's the shock. Shock isn't pain. It's the silence before pain. It's the internal static that buzzes when your worldview short-circuits. A parent you thought would never lie, does. A government you trusted betrays. A truth you built your life around collapses. And suddenly, you're not who you were a second ago. You're something else. Something raw, stripped. Most people run from this moment. They bury it, disassociate, drown it in distraction. Because it feels like death. And in a way, it is. Shock is the death of your mental immunity. The moment you realize you're not protected, not prepared, not in control. But what if that's not a weakness? What if it's a door? In the early days of psychological warfare experiments, researchers learned something horrifying. When a subject is placed in a state of shock, mild or severe, their defenses crumble. They become suggestible, vulnerable. Their belief systems are malleable. You could plant ideas, reprogram identities, rewrite history inside their heads. Not with force, with rupture. That's how cults operate. That's how interrogators break loyalty. That's how illusions collapse, not through persuasion, but through trauma. But here's the twist. What if you used it on yourself? Not as abuse, but as revelation. Because if you let the shock happen, truly let it crash through you, you access a part of yourself that isn't filtered, isn't curated, isn't polite, it's pure awareness. A split second where the mask falls and your mind stands naked, unshielded. And in that raw space, you can see things you normally can't, like the lies you've accepted, the identities you've borrowed, the limits you never questioned. Shock is a spotlight. It burns, yes, but it illuminates everything you've hidden in the dark. The key is not to resist it. Resistance is what makes it torture. But if you embrace it, if you lean into the disorientation, you begin to stretch, expand, transform. Because only when the structure collapses can you choose what to rebuild. That's why some of the most profound awakenings come after betrayal, after loss, after failure. You don't choose these events, but they open something primal. They unlock truths that safety would never reveal. Think of every person who said, "It changed me." They weren't talking about the event. They were talking about the shock, the detonation of normal, the forced reboot of identity. And they either became smaller or much, much bigger. And that's your choice, isn't it? Because shock won't ask permission. It shows up unannounced. In a diagnosis, a headline, a late-night phone call. And when it does, you have two paths: deny it, numb it, run from it, or embrace it. Let it burn through your lies. Let it show you what's real beneath the wreckage. Because that's the secret no one tells you. Shock doesn't just destroy, it reveals, it purifies, it humbles, it awakens. And sometimes it sets you free. But what if the next shock doesn't come from an enemy, but from someone who offers you their hand? What happens when you're forced to trust the very person you've never met? You've done it more times than you realize. Maybe it was the barista who smiled warmly while handing over your drink, or the mechanic who said your brakes needed replacing, or the person online with thousands of followers who told you this supplement would change your life. And without thinking twice, you believed them. You trusted a stranger, not fully, not blindly, but enough to shift behavior. Enough to change your mind, enough to open a part of yourself you usually guard. And here's the uncomfortable truth: that trust, it's not rare, it's automatic, it's hardwired, and it makes you vulnerable in ways you never imagined. Decades ago, researchers ran a simple experiment that changed how we understand obedience forever. You've probably heard of it, the Milgram experiment. An authority figure in a lab coat told participants to deliver electric shocks to a stranger in another room. And most of them did, not because they were cruel, not because they wanted to, but because the stranger in the lab coat told them it was the right thing to do. That's the key. A stranger with symbols of authority can override your moral compass, can make you ignore screams, can make you question your instincts. This isn't theory. It happened over and over again. And the terrifying part, it still happens. Not in labs, in everyday life. You see a uniform and you comply. You read a quote on a pretty background and you believe it. You hear a calm, confident voice and something in you softens. Your skepticism fades. Your defenses lower. You trust because the stranger seems trustworthy. But trust isn't neutral. It's a tool, a weapon, a shortcut your brain uses to save energy. You can't question everything. You can't verify every detail. So your mind filters. Does this person look competent? Sound confident? Seem familiar? If yes, then trust. Simple as that. And manipulators know this. It's why cult leaders wear white robes and speak in gentle tones. Why scammers copy speech patterns and facial expressions of people we love. Why advertising uses friendly, familiar faces to sell you things you don't need. Because trust is predictable. And when something is predictable, it can be exploited. You think you're making choices, but often you're responding to cues, hidden signals, subtle manipulations. You trust not because someone earned it, but because your brain wants the relief of certainty. Even more disturbing, You sometimes trust strangers more than people you know. Why? Because strangers haven't disappointed you yet. They don't come with baggage, with history, with context. So your mind projects purity, integrity, goodness, and in doing so, it fills the gaps with fantasy. The stranger becomes a canvas. In your trust, it becomes paint. But what if the stranger isn't worthy? What if their calm voice masks chaos? What if their warmth is calculated? What if you're just another experiment to them, another variable in a larger game? History is full of such experiments. Some conducted in secrecy, others hidden in plain sight. Strangers placed in authority, observers with clipboards, participants unaware. They were part of something bigger. And always the same lesson emerges: people trust faster than they think. And that trust can be twisted. So what do? You can't stop trusting. That's impossible. But you can start noticing. Who has your attention? Who's pulling your strings with nothing more than a smile and a steady tone? Who makes you feel safe without reason? Because once you see the mechanism, you can slow it down. You can pause before obeying. You can question before believing. You can ask yourself, does this person deserve my trust? Or have they just mastered how to look like they do? You trust strangers every day. That's not a flaw, it's a function. But it's a function that others have studied, tested, and learned to control. And sometimes, if you're quiet enough, you can feel it happening. The signal, a shift, a pulse. It starts subtly, a sensation, a flicker, like the room breathes beneath your skin. You think it's your heart, until you realize it's not beating in you, it's beating around you. A pulse, not imagined, not metaphor, real, but no one else notices. They continue speaking, moving, scrolling, oblivious to the rhythm that now wraps around your senses like a second heartbeat. You feel the pulse in your fingertips, though nothing touches them. You feel it behind your eyes, though there's nothing to see. You feel it in the air itself, as if the atoms are vibrating to a rhythm that predates your body and outlives your comprehension. This is not music. This is not noise. It's something older, a force you've been trained to ignore your whole life. But it was always there. Beneath every conversation, beneath every silence. Beneath you. Scientists once thought brain waves only occurred in the skull. Electrical storms trapped in a cranium. But then the experiments began. Quietly, secretly. Electrodes, Faraday cages, isolated rooms, subjects who reported strange sensations, patterns, pulses, intuitions they couldn't explain. Their bodies still, their minds alive. And the same word kept repeating in the notes. Synchronization. What were they synchronizing with? No device, no stimulus, just empty space, but not silent, not neutral. Something in the air was echoing back, responding, matching. Like the brain wasn't broadcasting anymore. It was listening. Some claimed it was a side effect of ultra-low frequency fields. Others whispered about the Earth's Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic pulse that pulses like a planetary heartbeat. But the implications were the same. Your mind isn't isolated. It's a receiver. And sometimes a conductor. You think your thoughts are yours, but when you feel the pulse, that illusion shatters, because the rhythm doesn't just enter your body, it reshapes it. You notice how your breathing aligns with it, how your tension spikes or melts depending on its rhythm. You're not just feeling a pulse, you're becoming it, and then things get stranger. You begin to anticipate movement before it happens. You finish people's sentences before they open their mouths. You reach for your phone a second before it rings. It's not magic, it's not coincidence, it's entrainment. Your brain, locked into something bigger, a signal, ancient, invisible,
all-encompassing, and the most disturbing part, you felt it before. Every time you entered a room and immediately felt uneasy, every time the hair stood up on your neck for no reason, every time a place felt wrong without explanation, that wasn't imagination. That was the pulse out of tune. You felt the interference, the disruption in the field. Your body registered it long before your mind knew what to call it. And when the pulse is aligned, that's when you feel invincible. That fleeting clarity, that rare moment when time slows and everything flows effortlessly. The zone, the trance, flow state. But what if it's not internal mastery? What if it's your brain momentarily syncing with something outside of you? Something vast, coherent, intelligent. The experiments never made headlines. Too strange, too unverifiable, too easy to dismiss as pseudoscience. But the researchers knew. They stopped asking, what is the brain doing? And started asking, what is the brain plugged into? Because once you feel the pulse, you can't unfeel it. You know you're part of something you can't see. A living grid, a bioelectrical ocean, and your thoughts are ripples. The question is, who else knows how to use it? Who has mapped this rhythm and learned to manipulate it? To disrupt, align, or hijack the pulse. Because once you realize your brain can be tuned like a frequency, you have to ask, who's broadcasting? And what are they trying to make you hear? But before you can even chase that thought, something deeper stirs. A whisper you forgot you remembered. A sound that never came through your ears, yet feels impossibly familiar. There are sounds you haven't heard in years, yet the moment they return, they hit you like lightning. A screen door creaking in summer. A dial-up modem shrieking to life. The distant bark of a dog you once knew. You don't just hear them, you feel them. They unlock something buried. Not just memories, but entire worlds you didn't know were still inside you. That's the strange power of sound. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for you to understand. It moves straight past your logic and sinks into your nervous system. Sound is primal, ancient, and when the right frequencies hit, they don't just trigger memory, they rewrite your perception. Governments and researchers have known this for decades. That sound can be used not just to entertain, but to control. That frequencies can alter behavior, evoke emotion, even manipulate thought without you realizing why you're acting the way you do. Sound is invisible, which makes it the perfect weapon. In the late 20th century, classified experiments tested low-frequency sound, known as infrasound, on soldiers. Frequencies below the threshold of conscious hearing. You don't hear them, but your body reacts. Your heart races. Your stomach churns. You feel uneasy, like you're being watched or followed. And you have no idea why. That's not paranoia. That's acoustic manipulation. They discovered that certain frequencies could induce panic. Others could paralyze decision-making. And some, disturbingly, could produce euphoria or obedience. Not through hypnosis, through resonance. By syncing the rhythm of your brain to an external beat. But what's even more disturbing is how familiar these effects are. Think about music. A single song can lift you or break you. National anthems stir pride. Religious chants induce trance. Marching rhythms make soldiers move in perfect unison. You think you're choosing how you feel, but much of it is being chosen for you through frequencies embedded in the air around you. Now consider this. What happens when the sounds aren't nostalgic or beautiful, but engineered? What happens when a government, a corporation, or an intelligence agency decides which memories to trigger, which emotions to stir? What happens when they find the right sound to make you trust, to make you obey, to make you forget? Sound becomes a scalpel, delicate, precise, and terrifyingly effective. Unlike images or words, which require interpretation, sound bypasses your critical mind. It reaches the parts of you that were formed before language. The parts that still remember what your mother's heartbeat sounded like from the inside. And that's where it gets even stranger. Because there are sounds you've never consciously heard, but your body still recognizes. Frequencies that mimic distress calls of infants. Vibrations that mirror the alarm cries of dying animals. Your biology is tuned to these cues. They're embedded in the ancient parts of your brain. Sounds that aren't just emotional, they're evolutionary. And when activated, they bypass thought and hijack action. So what if someone found a way to play those sounds without you knowing? What if they could recreate the experience of fear or safety or loyalty, not with argument, but with audio? You wouldn't need to be convinced. You'd just feel it and you'd obey, believing it was your own idea. And maybe that's already happening. Maybe you felt it, that unplaceable dread in a grocery store, that sudden nostalgia from an ad, that irrational calm during chaos. You don't question it because you assume your feelings are your own, but feelings are reactions, and reactions can be engineered. Your mind has doors you forgot were there, and sound is the master key. So the next time a memory returns, not with a thought but a sound, stop and listen. Not just to what you hear, but to what it's doing to you. Because the moment you hear it, you're no longer alone in your own mind. And if you're not in control of what you feel, what happens when someone tells you what to do? You think you'd never do it? You think if someone in a lab coat told you to hurt another person, you'd refuse. You imagine yourself standing up, walking out, saying no. But that's not how it happens. That's not how obedience works. It doesn't feel like surrender. It feels like order, like structure, like safety. The moment someone with perceived authority gives you a command, your brain shifts. It doesn't process the command as a personal decision. It processes it as a duty, an obligation, a transfer of moral responsibility. You're not doing it, you're just following instructions. That was the secret behind one of the most disturbing psychological experiments ever conducted. A man in a white coat tells you to press a button. On the other side of the wall, someone screams in pain. You ask if it's real. He says yes. You ask if you should stop. He says no. He says no. And so you keep pressing. You're sweating. Your hands tremble, but you keep going. Why? Because you're not the one deciding anymore. You've yielded to authority. You've outsourced your conscience. And now you're just a cog in a machine, grinding forward even as your soul recoils. This isn't hypothetical. It happened, over and over. Ordinary people, not sadists or psychopaths, followed orders to inflict harm simply because someone authoritative told them to. And the worst part, many of them were relieved. Relieved that they didn't have to choose, that someone else was in charge, that the burden wasn't theirs. That's the hidden power of authority. It doesn't have to force you. It just has to look legitimate. Uniforms, badges, titles, these aren't just symbols. They're psychological switches. They make you second-guess your instincts, your morality, even your perception of reality. You defer, you hesitate, you obey, and it starts early. You're taught to respect authority, to trust teachers, doctors, police, leaders, to believe that those in charge must know better. That questioning is disruptive, disrespectful, dangerous. So when someone in authority tells you to ignore your gut, you do. When they ask you to compromise your values, you consider it. When they demand obedience, you offer it. This is how ordinary people commit extraordinary wrongs, not with malice, with submission, with blind faith in the system, in the chain of command, in the assumption that if someone higher up said it's okay, then it must be okay. But authority isn't inherently moral. It isn't inherently wise. It's just power wearing a suit. And the moment you forget that, the moment you treat authority as infallible, you become vulnerable. You become an instrument, not an individual. It's easier that way. Being told what to do frees you from doubt, from guilt, from complexity. You get to move through life with the comfort of structure, even if that structure demands cruelty, silence, or complicity. And when it's all over, when the orders stop and the consequences appear, what do you say? I was just doing my job. I was following orders. I didn't have a choice. But you did. You always did. The truth is unsettling because it means you're responsible, not just for your actions, but for the authority you choose to obey. You don't just yield to authority, you legitimize it, you empower it, you make it real. So ask yourself, who do you obey and why? What do they have that makes you trust them? What makes you silence yourself in their presence? Fear, respect, habit? Because sometimes the greatest danger isn't disobedience, it's obedience without question. And once you've handed over your conscience, it's easy to let your sight follow. There are moments when clarity would destroy you, when seeing things as they truly are would shatter the illusion you need to function. So you blur your vision, not with your eyes, but with your mind. You look directly at the truth and then twist it, dull it, soften its edges. Not because you're weak, but because some truths are too sharp to hold in your bare hands. This isn't an accident. It's not even a flaw. It's survival. Your brain has spent years learning how to filter reality, not to show you what's real, but to show you what's useful, what's manageable, what won't crush you. You think you're seeing the world. You're not. You're seeing a version of it your mind believes you can handle. That's why people can stand in the same room, witness the same event, and walk away with completely different realities. Because their brains didn't show them the same thing. They blurred what needed blurring, sharpened what needed defending, erased what threatened their identity, enhanced what validated their beliefs. Think about memory. You don't remember events. You remember the story you told yourself about those events. And that story shifts every time you recall it. The mind edits, revises, censors, not to lie, but to protect. You can't trust your memories, but you do anyway, because the alternative is too destabilizing. Now imagine if you could see the raw footage. No edits, no blur, just the cold, unfiltered truth of your life. Every time you compromised your values, every time you hurt someone you loved, every moment you knew what was right and chose convenience instead, you couldn't handle it. That's why the blur exists. But here's where it gets darker. Because once you learn to blur your vision, you don't stop at yourself. You start doing it to the world. You stop seeing injustice because it's easier not to. You stop noticing manipulation because it's baked into the system. You tell yourself everything is fine because challenging the narrative would require action, and action would require clarity. So you keep blurring. You blur when a relationship feels wrong but staying feels easier. You blur when a job depletes you but leaving terrifies you. You blur when the truth taps you on the shoulder and you pretend you didn't feel it. And every time you do, you get better at it. The edges fade. The questions dull, and soon you're not lying to yourself anymore. You just can't see clearly enough to recognize the lie. You think this is normal, and it is. But that doesn't make it safe, because the blur doesn't just protect you. It imprisons you. It traps you in a world where everything is just tolerable enough to avoid change, just clear enough to function, just distorted enough to keep you asleep. But there are moments, fleeting, uncomfortable moments, when something cuts through. A conversation, a book, a dream, a memory you can't push down. And for a second the blur lifts. You see yourself,
You see the world, and it hits you with such force that you have to look away. Because if you didn't, everything would have to change. That's the paradox of clarity. You crave it, you fear it, and when it finally comes, it demands a price. So ask yourself, what aren't you seeing? What have you blurred so thoroughly that you've forgotten it was ever clear? Because the hidden powers that shaped you, the forces you were never meant to notice, aren't hiding anymore. You're just too well trained to look. But once you learn to see through the blur, you start to notice something else. A rhythm, a thread, a strange familiarity, as if everything you've ever ignored is quietly repeating. And now, finally, you sense the pattern. You ever feel it? That eerie tickle in the back of your skull when something lines up a little too perfectly. A coincidence that doesn't feel accidental. A repetition that isn't random. You shrug it off. Of course, you have to. But part of you senses it. There's a pattern, and it's watching you back. At first, it's subtle. A number that follows you. A phrase you hear twice in the same day, from people who've never met. A dream that echoes something you haven't told anyone. It doesn't feel like paranoia. It feels like alignment. Like something beneath reality is trying to make contact. That's when the suspicion starts to grow. What if life isn't chaos wearing the mask of order, but order pretending to be chaos? You sense it in the way strangers glance at you for a beat too long, in the uncanny timing of certain events, in the way information sometimes finds you before you even know you need it. Algorithms that seem psychic, coincidences that border on prophetic. The more you notice, the harder it becomes to stop. It's like staring at one of those optical illusions. You can't unsee it. Your mind begins tracing invisible threads between everything. Symbols in advertisements, patterns in news cycles, messages embedded in noise. You start to wonder if you're being trained, conditioned. If something is nudging you, testing your reaction, watching your choices, like you're part of an experiment. You never agreed to join, but instead of a lab, it's your life. Instead of white coats, it's strangers with familiar smiles. This isn't just fantasy. There have been experiments. Real ones. Hidden in government archives, buried in academic footnotes, cloaked in the language of behavioral science. They tested whether people would follow orders from authority, even when it meant harming others. Whether people would shock someone to death if told it was part of a study. Whether social cues could override morality, instinct, even survival. And guess what? They would. They did. They still do. You think you're immune, that you'd notice the manipulation. But these patterns weren't designed for your conscious mind. They're coded for your instincts, for the parts of you that obey without asking. Ever wonder why you crave validation? At exactly the moment you open your phone, why outrage and fear spread faster than facts? Why crowds sway like tides under a full moon of suggestion? It's not magic. It's pattern recognition turned against you. Your own wiring, repurposed. Because once you start seeing the pattern, it's hard to tell what's real anymore, what's coincidence, and what's conditioning. Whether your thoughts are truly your own, or echoes of something whispered from just outside your awareness. You sense the pattern not because you're broken, but because your mind is trying to protect you, to decode the trap, to wake you up. But the more you understand, the more the world tilts. The more you realize how little you control. How many of your beliefs, preferences, fears were planted, cultivated like crops in a farm of the mind. You start to ask dangerous questions. Who benefits from the pattern? Who shapes it? And if the pattern is real, what does it want from you? You sense it because it's there. Not always malevolent, but never neutral. And if you look long enough, if you listen closely enough, it starts to respond. Not with words, but with arrangements. echoes, mirrors. The pattern isn't just watching, it's speaking. And what happens when it speaks in the language of healing? When belief alone changes biology, when suggestion rewires perception, that's when you don't just see the pattern, you taste it. You swallow the pill. It's small, smooth, tasteless. The doctor said it would help. You trust them. Maybe you even feel the relief creeping in already. Your chest loosens. Your head clears. The pain, the fear, the pressure, they all begin to fade. But then you're told something that unravels it all. The pill was a sugar capsule, a placebo, nothing. And yet it worked. You didn't just imagine the change. You felt it, measurable, real, documented by monitors and medical reports. How is that possible? How does something fake heal something real? Because you taste the placebo, and the placebo tastes like belief. Your mind is not a passive observer. It's a storyteller, a builder, a god of perception. When it believes you're being healed, it acts accordingly. It floods your body with chemicals, endorphins, dopamine, serotonin. It adjusts blood pressure. It eases inflammation. It even suppresses pain, not because the pill did anything, but because you believed it would. This isn't a trick. It's not deception. It's power. One of the most unsettling truths in all of medicine is this: belief can be more potent than any substance. In countless studies, patients given sugar pills report reduced pain, better mood, even remission from symptoms. And when they're told the pill will have side effects, they experience those too. Nausea, fatigue, dizziness, all summoned by expectation alone. You don't just react to the world, you create your version of it. This power, the placebo effect, is so potent that it's used as the baseline in drug trials. To be considered effective, a real drug has to beat what your mind can already do on its own. And often, it doesn't. Sometimes belief outperforms the chemical. But that raises a terrifying question. How much of your suffering, your sickness, your healing is shaped by what you believe? And what else in your life is a placebo? The self-help books that seem to change your mindset overnight, the crystals you carry in your pocket, the ritual before a big event, the lucky charm, the prayer, the identity you assume when you walk into certain rooms. Maybe none of them have power, and maybe all of them do, because you gave them that power. You taste the placebo every time you buy into something with your full emotional weight. Not because the object or ritual or substance has magic in itself, but because your belief turns it into magic. This is the secret scientists have known and feared for decades. That belief is not just psychological, it's biological, tangible, measurable, but it's also volatile, because if belief can heal, it can also harm. There's a darker twin to the placebo, the nocebo. If you believe something will make you sick, it probably will. If you think you're cursed, poisoned, or doomed, your body begins to act like it's true. People have died believing they were terminally ill when they weren't. Others have gotten sick from substances that were harmless, simply because they thought they were dangerous. That's the cost of this power. It doesn't discriminate between hope and fear. You're not just vulnerable to the world, you're vulnerable to your own expectations of it. And this leaves you in a terrifying position. Your body listens to every word your mind whispers, every fear, every hope, every assumption, and it acts accordingly. So what are you feeding it? When you accept a label, sick, weak, incapable, your body follows. When you believe you're healing, changing, growing, it follows that too. Belief becomes biology. Imagination becomes chemistry. You taste the placebo, and your cells obey. This isn't an excuse to abandon science. It's a call to understand something deeper. That your mind, while not omnipotent, is far from powerless. And when it aligns with intention, ritual, and story, it becomes a force that modern science is still struggling to explain. You're not just reacting to reality, you're shaping it. And sometimes the most powerful medicine you can take is a lie you believe in. But what happens when that lie isn't planted in you by a pill, but by someone else's voice, mirrored back into your mind until you can't tell which thoughts were ever yours? You think you're just listening, that the words you hear wash over you, harmless, but they don't. They seep in, they echo, and then they start to shape you. You hear a phrase, something simple. Maybe it's a compliment, maybe it's a criticism. You're so smart, you're difficult. You always mess things up, and before you can even question it, something inside you begins to mirror it, reflect it, accept it. This is how language controls you, not through force, but through reflection. You become what you hear. We're social creatures, hardwired to internalize the voices around us, especially when we're young, especially when we're vulnerable. The voice of a parent, a teacher, a stranger, it enters you and settles like truth, not because it's true, but because repetition gives it power. You start to think in borrowed phrases. You adopt opinions like clothing. You replay old conversations, not because they're relevant, but because they've become a part of how you understand yourself. This is the unspoken experiment. Expose a person to enough carefully crafted words and watch their identity shift. Not suddenly, but slowly, invisibly, like a fog rolling in. Governments know this. Advertisers know this. Cult leaders know this. They don't need to hurt you. They just need to name you, over and over again, and you will become the name. You start to describe yourself the way others did. I'm just bad with money. I can't handle confrontation. I'm a mess. You think you're being honest. But really, you're just mirroring back the words that were handed to you. This isn't just psychology. It's programming. Language as code. Belief as malware. Even in conversation, you mirror. Not just opinions, but tone, rhythm, phrasing. The person speaking shapes your response, and without realizing it, you start to become more like them, matching energy, mimicking cadence, aligning worldview. And you think it's connection, but it might be control. Now imagine this being studied, secretly. In experiments where subjects are bombarded with subtle cues, phrases designed to implant identity. You're tired, you're calm, you're angry. And the subjects begin to feel those things. No physical stimulus, just words, just mirrors. You see it in advertising. You deserve this. You're not enough without this. Everyone is watching. These aren't suggestions. They're commands, disguised as compliments. And you obey, not because you're weak, but because you're wired to reflect. Even when you resist, say that's not true. The words have still entered. The mirror still forms. Resistance becomes part of the loop. So what happens when you become conscious of the mirror? When you realize your thoughts aren't purely yours, that your self-image has fingerprints all over it. Some from childhood, some from strangers, some from algorithms. It's disorienting, because you don't know where you end and the echoes begin. But that disorientation is the first real thought you've had in a long time. It's not a reflection. It's a crack in the glass. The question isn't whether you're influenced. You are. You always have been. The question is whether you can recognize the influence before it becomes identity. Because words are mirrors, but mirrors can be broken or turned toward those who held them up to you. And if you listen closely, you can start to hear another rhythm behind the words. A pattern, a pulse. The question is, can you count it before it counts you? Close your eyes. Tune out the noise. Now count 1, 2, 3, each beat of your heart. It's subtle at first, almost imperceptible, a soft thump buried beneath layers of breath, movement, and thought. But the more you focus, the louder it becomes, not in sound, but in presence. You're counting the very rhythm of your existence, and with each beat, something unsettling begins to stir. You start to realize your heart isn't just pumping blood, it's keeping time. It's a metronome for your life, a silent conductor guiding not just your body, but your mind. Every thought, every emotion, every impulse rising and falling in sync with that pulse. You don't just live inside your mind, you live inside your heartbeat. Now here's the secret they never taught you. Your perception is tied to this rhythm. Count the beats long enough, and your awareness starts to warp. Time stretches, the world slows down. A second no longer feels like a second. Your internal clock begins to override the external one. You become hyper-aware of everything, that moment right before a thought arrives. The breath before a word escapes your lips. The flicker of tension before someone speaks. You catch the gaps, the silences, the invisible threads between events, and once you notice them, you can't unsee them. You realize most people are moving through life completely unaware of this rhythm. They don't hear the beat, they don't feel the pattern, but you do. This is the first crack in the illusion that life moves independently of you. That time is something done to you. It's not, it's something you co-create every second with your body. And the deeper you go, the more terrifying the implications become. Because if you can feel your pulse, you can manipulate your attention. And if you can manipulate your attention, you can alter reality. Experiments have shown this. Subjects trained to monitor their heartbeat can change their perception of pain, increase focus, even alter their emotional response. Just by counting, just by tuning into that primal rhythm echoing inside their chest. Your heartbeat is a back door into your subconscious. It's not just a measure of life, it's a control panel. And most of us walk around, never once looking at the dashboard. We let the body run the show. But the moment you stop and count the beats, you begin to take the reins. That's what terrifies people. Not the idea that the body is in control, but that they might actually be able to control it. Because then comes responsibility. Then comes power. And power always demands awareness. But it doesn't end with awareness. That's just the beginning. Once you start syncing to your own rhythm, you begin syncing with the rhythms around you. Other people, spaces, conversations, the social pulse of a room. You can feel when a person's energy dips. You can sense the precise moment to speak, to pause, to push. It's not manipulation, it's resonance. Like tuning forks vibrating at the same frequency. You're not guessing anymore, you're listening, intuitively, physically. And then you begin to wonder, who else has mastered this? Who's been trained to hear the rhythm beneath the surface? Athletes do it, surgeons do it, performers do it. So do interrogators, hypnotists, manipulators, all those who deal in the delicate currency of timing. Because timing isn't just about skill, it's about control, subtle control, unspoken control. But there's a darker layer. What happens when you become so in tune with your internal rhythm that it starts to feel fragile? When every skipped beat becomes a source of fear, when every flutter becomes a question. Am I okay? Am I still in control? You spiral. Your heartbeat becomes both your anchor and your prison. This is the danger of awareness. Once you unlock a hidden power, you can't lock it back up. Once you tune in, you can't tune it out. And the more you count, the more you realize there is no such thing as background noise. Only signals you haven't learned to decode. You begin to understand this rhythm was never random. It was always speaking to you, always guiding you.
And now that you can hear it, you start to see how everything flows: thought, action, energy, time. And what happens when you stop counting and start conducting? What happens when you stop riding the rhythm and start shaping it? There's a moment, brief, electric, when you realize that everything around you is responding to something inside you, not your thoughts, not your actions, but your attention. Where it lingers, what it avoids, how it shifts. It's invisible, intangible, but it steers everything: your perception, your choices, even your reality. And here's the secret: attention is the current, focus is the flow, and you, whether you know it or not, are the one holding the switch. Every experiment in cognitive psychology, every hidden manipulation test converges on this one undeniable truth: where your attention goes, your reality follows. The world doesn't present itself neutrally. It bends subtly and persistently to what you focus on. And that makes your attention the most valuable and the most vulnerable resource you possess. Take a moment and notice your breath. You weren't thinking about it until just now, but it was happening. Constant, automatic. Then your focus snapped to it, and now it feels almost surreal. Heavier, louder. That's not the breath changing. That's you. That's the flow responding. Now extend that outward. Every ad you scroll past, every headline you pause on, every fleeting comment that sticks in your mind, they're pulling you. Not with force, but with precision. Your attention is being harvested, redirected, monetized. But not just by corporations or algorithms, by people, by environments, even by your own unconscious patterns. That's what the experiments reveal. That your brain reacts milliseconds before your conscious mind even decides. That suggestion shapes perception. That priming can reroute judgment. They show that choice is often an illusion. Unless you become aware of where the flow is going and choose to redirect it. Because once you realize your attention is steering your emotional state, your priorities, even your future, you stop treating it casually. You start defending it like territory. You become the gatekeeper, the architect, the source of direction. But control isn't about rigidity. It's about rhythm, about learning how to pause, how to pull back from compulsive habits and redirect the current somewhere intentional. Because the default is manipulation. The default is chaos disguised as urgency. Control isn't your natural state. It's your conscious reclamation. Most people live in reaction. They don't flow. They flood. Overstimulated, distracted, drained. Because their attention is being siphoned off through 1,000 tiny leaks, each one justified, normalized, expected. But if you plug those leaks, something wild happens. The energy returns, the clarity builds, the noise quiets, and then finally you start noticing what was always there but hidden, the small quiet patterns that actually matter, the things that grow when watered with attention. Your curiosity, your strength, your creativity, your pain, not as enemies but as guides, each one part of the current, waiting to be listened to. The truth is, you can't control life, but you can control where you place your awareness inside it. And that might be more powerful than controlling life itself. Because when you guide the flow, even chaos becomes legible, even suffering gains direction. You stop drowning, you start swimming. And once you learn to swim, you stop asking what's going to happen next. You start asking, where am I choosing to go? But what if the very choices you think you're making were already shaped by invisible numbers you don't even see? There's a quiet click as the machine starts. You sit down, and a man in a white lab coat hands you a sheet of paper. On it, a list of numbers. Your job is simple. Read them, memorize them, repeat them, That's it. The numbers don't mean anything. At least, not at first. But soon, you begin to feel like they do. They start to dictate your choices. When to speak, when to stet. You think you're just following instructions, participating in a harmless study. But slowly, subtly, the numbers become law. The experimenter says nothing. He doesn't force you. He simply shows you the number, and you obey. This isn't fiction. It's real. A study conducted decades ago at Yale University. Participants were told to administer electric shocks to a stranger whenever he answered a question incorrectly. Each wrong answer increased the voltage. The numbers climbed 75, 150, 270, 300. The stranger screamed in pain, begged, went silent. But the person in the white coat, the authority, said, "Continue." So most people did, not just some, ordinary people, not monsters, not sadists, neighbors, parents, teachers. They obeyed the numbers. They obeyed authority. They kept going, even when they believed they were killing someone. Why? Because the numbers were there. Because the voice in the lab coat was calm. Because the structure felt safe, even as it demanded cruelty. They were told it was scientific, necessary, objective, and that illusion of order was enough to override their morality. Numbers are seductive like that. They strip away emotion. They promise precision, objectivity, truth. But they can also become blinders, turning humans into machines, ethics into equations. Consider your daily life. Your phone buzzes. Your screen lights up. Metrics track everything. Steps walked, calories burned, hours slept. You optimize, tweak, obey the numbers. You don't question why. You just want the line to go up. Your job is no different. You hit targets, chase quotas, meet deadlines, not because you believe in them, but because the numbers say so. Performance reviews, ratings, rankings, they frame your worth, shape your decisions, define your success. You adjust your behavior to fit the data, and you start to feel safe inside that system. Like the numbers know better. Like they protect you from uncertainty. But here's the truth. The moment you start trusting the numbers more than your own instincts, you've already surrendered something essential. Think of financial markets, crime statistics, political polls. We see percentages, averages, margins of error. But we forget what those numbers represent. Real people, real suffering, real complexity. When numbers become commandments, empathy fades, judgment gets outsourced, and we justify horrific choices with clean data. Ask yourself, how many times have you ignored your gut because the numbers told you otherwise? How often have you stayed in a situation, relationship, job, system, because the metrics looked right, even when everything felt wrong? This isn't about math being evil. It's about your relationship to it. Numbers should be tools, not masters, but we've allowed them to become idols. We worship efficiency, predictability, output. We measure everything except meaning. We track everything except truth. And deep down, you know this. You feel it in the disconnect between your performance and your purpose. In the quiet panic of being quantified but not understood. Because the moment you obey the numbers without question, you're no longer thinking, you're complying. You're not analyzing, you're submitting. And the most dangerous part, you might not even notice until one day the numbers tell you to do something you know is wrong. And you do it anyway, not because you're evil, but because you're trained. Because you've learned that obedience is easier than conscience. That silence is safer than resistance. That as long as the numbers are clean, the consequences don't matter. But what happens when the numbers ask for more than obedience? What happens when they demand surrender? You're not strapped down, but it feels like you are. You're sitting still, but something's happening beneath your skin, subtle, inevitable. You think you're in control, but you're already surrendering, and you don't even realize it. It starts small, a request, a suggestion, nothing aggressive, nothing overt. A figure in a lab coat asks you to press a button. Easy, no consequence. Then again, the light goes off, the tone changes. You're told someone else is in another room, and your button sends them a shock. You hesitate, but they reassure you. It's important for the study. They agreed to it. You're not responsible, and that's the magic phrase. You're not responsible. The moment responsibility leaves the room, control follows quietly behind. That's not fiction. That was the Milgram experiment. Participants like you, like anyone, shocked strangers to dangerous levels simply because someone in authority told them to. They weren't monsters. They weren't broken. They were ordinary. That's what made it terrifying. They surrendered control and never even noticed it leaving. Now ask yourself, how often do you hand over control in your daily life? Not in dramatic, cinematic ways, but in the quiet, creeping kind. You follow routines, obey subtle cues, respond to systems designed to nudge you just enough to make you believe it was your idea. Every app you use, every ad you scroll past, every notification timed just right. They're not just tools, they're experiments. Live ones, constant ones. Algorithms test your patience, your preferences, your triggers. They adapt to you while shaping you. You think you're choosing, but you're reacting. You think you're free, but you're already guided. Take the Stanford prison experiment. Volunteers were split, guards and prisoners. Within days, the guards turned sadistic. The prisoners broke down. No training, no threats, just roles, labels, context. And people surrendered control of who they were because the environment demanded it. You think that's rare? You wear roles too. Employee, partner, consumer, voter. And every role comes with a script. Every script with expectations. Every expectation with pressure. Slowly, invisibly, you conform. Not out of weakness, but because control is heavy. Responsibility is exhausting. So when the chance arises to let someone else steer, you do. And here's the most twisted part. Surrendering control often feels good, comforting, reassuring. To obey is easier than to decide. To follow is safer than to lead. You crave order. You seek guidance. Not because you're weak, but because control, real control, requires constant awareness. And awareness is exhausting. That's why hypnosis works. Not because the subject is asleep, but because they agree to stop resisting, to follow, to obey. The mind doesn't shut down. It just stops steering. The same thing happens every day. You sit in a classroom, a boardroom, a theater. You agree to the terms. You accept the structure. And slowly, you stop questioning the frame you're in. It's surrendered. Now think deeper. Think about belief systems, ideologies, movements. You're taught to see them as choices. But how many did you really choose? How many were inherited, absorbed, conditioned into you, before you even had language to challenge them? You didn't surrender control all at once. It was chipped away, encouraged, reinforced, rewarded. You follow rules you never wrote, fight battles you never started, hold values you never questioned. You surrendered without noticing. And now control feels foreign, like a burden, not a birthright. But here's the twist. The scariest moment isn't realizing you lost control. It's the second after you try to take it back. Because to reclaim it, you have to face something unbearable, the storm of your own thoughts. And that's exactly where we're heading next. When you halt your thoughts. Picture this. A researcher hooks electrodes to your scalp, slides you into a dim, silent room, and tells you to relax.
But then they ask for something more impossible. They say, clear your mind. No thinking, no images, no inner voice, just silence. You nod, pretend to comply, but inside, chaos. Try it now. Try to stop thinking, not just quiet the mind. Stop it, completely. Go ahead. Halt the parade of language. Kill the background hum of imagery. Remove the narrator. Erase the internal monologue that's been with you since you were a child. You can't do it. Not really. Because your thoughts don't follow your commands. They emerge on their own. They appear without permission. The more you try to stop them, the louder they become. Tell your brain not to think about a pink elephant, and it paints the image instantly, rebelliously, vividly. Your mind doesn't obey you. It resists you. And yet, you believe you're in control of it. This is the first discovery of the mind science experiments they never wanted to make public, that you are not your thoughts, you're not their source, you're their witness. They rise like bubbles in a boiling pot. You can watch them, label them, try to ignore them, but you cannot stop them, you cannot will yourself into silence, unless something else intervenes. In secret labs and fringe psychology rooms, scientists discovered that total thought cessation could be triggered, not by meditation, not by training, but through extreme targeted manipulation. Certain frequencies, specific words repeated under the right conditions, or prolonged sensory deprivation could break the stream, not slow it, tote it. Like a brain hitting a wall, suddenly a void, not peace, not calm, just absence. And in that absence, something happened, something terrifying. Subjects reported not emptiness, but presence, something watching. A strange external awareness that felt alien, but aware. Some described it as godlike, others as malevolent. All agreed on one thing: it wasn't them. You halt your thoughts, and something else begins listening. And here's the more disturbing twist. In some experiments, the absence didn't end when the stimulus stopped. Thoughts returned, but changed, reorganized, simplified, more compliant, as if the original mind had been scrubbed, reset, not erased, aligned to something. No one could explain it. So the projects were buried, participants released. Data vanished, but the idea remained, quietly infecting certain corners of the intelligence community, cult movements, and neurophilosophy. If you can halt thoughts completely, you can introduce new ones undetected. Like formatting a hard drive before uploading a program. Free will reprogrammed in silence. And yet, the public chases it, in yoga studios, in self-help books, in mindfulness apps. Everyone wants a quiet mind. Everyone wants peace. But what if the silence isn't yours? What if the moment your thoughts go dark, you invite something else in, because you think silence is empty? But in the wrong hands, silence becomes a doorway. So now, ask yourself, when your mind goes still, who's really in there with you? And what happens when that silence starts to speak back? They didn't shout. They didn't need to. They whispered, quietly, persistently, strategically. And you listened without even knowing it. That's the terrifying beauty of influence. True manipulation doesn't look like control. It looks like consensus. It looks like your own thoughts echoing back to you, when in reality they were planted. Some of the most disturbing experiments in psychology didn't involve torture or violence. They involved suggestion, obedience, conformity, like Aisha's lines. One simple test: a group is asked to identify which line matches another in length. The answer is obvious. But one by one, the people before you choose the wrong line. You know they're wrong, you see it. And yet, when it's your turn, you hesitate. your voice falters. You say the wrong answer, not because you believe it, but because everyone else did. That's not just peer pressure, that's cognitive infiltration. The voice of the group becomes louder than the voice of reason. And then there's Milgram, the obedience study. A man in a white lab coat tells you to shock another person. You hear screams, pleas, silence. But the voice of authority is calm, reassuring. The experiment requires that you continue, and so you do. You shock a stranger because a stranger told you to. You echo their whisper, even when it violates your conscience. But this goes deeper than experiments. It's in your daily life. You echo whispers all the time, beliefs you never chose, opinions you didn't question, fears that were handed to you like inheritance. You believe what your tribe believes, not because it's true, but because disagreement feels like exile. You adopt the vocabulary of your group, the rituals, the norms. You say what you're supposed to say. You feel what you're expected to feel. And all the while, the original whisper spreads through families, classrooms, offices, screens, until it sounds exactly like your own voice. You echo not because you're weak, but because you're wired to belong. Humans survive in groups. We evolved to align, to synchronize, to mimic. Because in ancient times, to stand alone was to die alone. And though we no longer live in caves or run from wolves, our minds still fear the cost of dissent. So we nod, we agree, we mimic, we echo. And that's how systems survive, not through brute force but through whispered consensus. A quiet hum of agreement that drowns out the scream of individuality. Even rebellion gets absorbed. It becomes aesthetic, safe, marketable. The system doesn't mind opposition, as long as it's predictable, as long as it doesn't threaten the foundation. And so even the rebels start to echo. But the most disturbing part, you often don't know you're echoing. You think you're original, independent, critical. But how much of your inner voice was authored by you? How many of your thoughts are truly yours? What if your deepest fears, your strongest beliefs, your guiding values were planted? And what if they were planted not through commands, but through whispers, soft, consistent, invisible? This isn't just theory. This is the architecture of control. It's subtle, silent, and it works. So the question isn't whether you echo. It's who you echo and why. Can you trace your beliefs to their source? Can you separate your voice from the voices around you? Can you tell the difference between your conscience and your conditioning? Because the moment you hear the echo and recognize it, you gain power. Not to silence the whisper, but to replace it, to speak something new, to make the echo your own. But to do that, first, you must learn how to listen. Really listen. Because only in stillness can you detect the whisper underneath the noise, the frequency beneath the feedback, the thought beneath the programming. And only then can you harness it, shape it, transcend it. But what if the key to shaping your mind isn't louder thoughts but quieter ones? There's a moment right before the storm breaks where everything goes still. The birds stop singing. The wind freezes mid-breath. Even your own body quiets, sensing something's coming. It's not peace. It's potential. That eerie calm before the chaos isn't weakness. It's focus, power suspended, held, waiting. And you felt it too, in a hospital room, waiting for a diagnosis. In the seconds before a breakup, at the edge of a decision that might change everything. The world narrows, time slows. You become hyper-aware, the flicker of lights, the hum in your chest, the exact weight of your next word. That isn't fear, that's the calm, the real calm. Not relaxation, but readiness. You've been told calm is soft, passive, something to retreat into. But that's a lie. True calm is not the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of it. The eye inside your own hurricane. A place not of peace, but of control. And when you find it, you become dangerous. Not loud, not aggressive, just unshakable. And that's exactly why those secret experiments terrified people. The ones buried in government files, disguised as therapy or performance tests, when what they were really studying was something far more unnerving. How stillness could change biology. Meditation trials, where subjects slowed their heart rate to the brink of death. Remote viewers who found targets thousands of miles away, with nothing but focused attention. Soldiers trained to harness a level of calm so deep they could lie still, unseen for hours. Heartbeats undetectable, minds silent, bodies invisible. This wasn't spiritual. This was scientific, measurable, reproducible, and deeply unsettling. Because it meant power didn't always look like force. It looked like stillness, awareness, discipline. You think of control as reaction, moving faster, thinking quicker. But what if real control was the opposite? What if the calm wasn't where control ends, but where it begins? You've seen it before. The surgeon with steady hands while chaos erupts around him. The negotiator whose voice lowers when tensions rise. The parent who doesn't yell but makes you freeze with a single look. That's power without volume. And here's the part that no one tells you. You can learn it. It's not magic. It's a choice. It's what happens when you stop feeding the fire and start becoming the furnace. When you stop trying to control what's around you and start mastering what's within you. Your heart, your breath, your thoughts. These aren't just parts of you. They are tools, weapons, switches. And when you flip them the right way, you change the way the world responds to you. People feel it. They back off. They hesitate. They listen. Not because you're loud, but because you're unmoved. But it's not easy. Because calm requires trust. Trust in yourself, in your body, in your ability to handle what comes next. That's why most people never get there. They panic, overthink, lash out. They confuse noise for strength, reaction for leadership, emotion for depth. And so they stay surface level, fragile, easily provoked. But you can be different. The next time your chest tightens, your thoughts race, and your world begins to spin, don't run from it. Lean in. Find that place beneath the panic, the deep place, the still place. The calm that isn't escape, but emergence. That's your real power. Not the ability to avoid pressure, but to absorb it, hold it, and walk through it, untouched. The calm is not the opposite of the storm, it is the core of it. And when you learn to harness it, you stop being tossed by the winds, and you become the force steering through them. But be warned, the calm leads somewhere darker. Because sometimes, to truly master your inner world, you have to walk into the places you've spent a lifetime avoiding. There's a moment quiet and cold when you finally stop running from it. The darkness, not just the absence of light, but the part of you that hides behind politeness, behind smiles, behind everything you've told yourself you're supposed to be. You were taught to fear it, to suppress it, to bury the anger, the shame, the hunger, the chaos. You learned early that good people stay in the light, that control equals virtue, that if you just keep smiling, no one will see the storm underneath. But here's the truth. No one told you. The darkness never leaves. It waits, patiently. Not because it wants to destroy you, but because it is you, a part of you. The raw, primal, untamed self that doesn't care about approval, doesn't care about manners or appearances. The part that remembers what you've forgotten, how to feel without filter, how to want without apology. Most people
never face it. They numb it with routines, sedate it with distractions, bury it under performance. But the more you suppress it, the more it controls you from the shadows. It whispers into your choices, bleeds into your relationships, builds pressure until one day it erupts, reckless, explosive, misunderstood. You think you're protecting yourself by avoiding it. You're not, you're just fragmenting your identity. Because true power, real, terrifying power, only comes when you face the parts of yourself you've labeled unworthy. When you stop flinching at your own shadow. When you stop saying, "That's not me," and instead say, "That is me, and I'm not afraid." This is what the secret experiments never told you. The ones that probed human limits, that tried to map the psyche like a machine. They measured cognition, obedience, memory, but they never captured the moment when a person stops resisting their inner chaos and starts listening to it. They never measured what happens when you stare into your own abyss and realize it's not empty, it's alive. Because when you stop fighting the darkness, it doesn't consume you, it frees you. It shows you where your pain comes from, why your patterns repeat, why you sabotage, why you cling to people who hurt you, why you're afraid to succeed. It shows you the parts of your story you've tried to erase, and in doing so, it offers you something rare: integration. You become whole, not in spite of your darkness, but because of it. You learn that rage can become boundary, that shame can become wisdom, that chaos, when understood, becomes creativity. The very things you were told to hide become your most sacred tools. But this isn't easy. It means sitting with things that make your skin crawl. Memories, failures, thoughts that scare you. It means unlearning everything you've been told about what makes you good. Because goodness, without self-awareness, is just a cage painted white. Embracing the darkness means owning your story without editing. It means realizing that the monsters you fear were created to protect you. That your worst impulses are signals, not sins. That you are not broken. You are complex, and your complexity is holy. You weren't meant to live in perpetual light. That's not where growth happens. Growth is rooted in shadow, in struggle, in silence. So if you've been running, stop. Turn around, walk straight into the dark. You'll find something there that no one else can give you: yourself. And once you've found that, once you've stood in that silence, breathing in the blackness, you'll be ready. Because the next step is diving even deeper, where sound ends and something stranger begins. There's a moment right before sound disappears. A kind of pressure in the air, as if the world is holding its breath. And then, nothing. Not quiet. Not stillness. Actual nothing. The kind of silence that isn't empty but impossibly full, like the world collapsed inward and left you alone with something ancient. You dive into that silence, and it swallows you whole. Most people run from silence. They fill it with chatter, music, machines, any noise at all. Because true silence isn't peaceful. It's unsettling. It strips away everything you use to define yourself. No external validation, no distractions, just you. And that's the experiment. One conducted in labs, in isolation tanks, in government-funded rooms, so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat like a war drum in your chest. Your breath becomes deafening. Your blood sounds like a stream inside your ears. Your sense of where you end and the world begins dissolves. And what's left is the real test. Because when there's no sound, no feedback, no signal, what do you become?
In one infamous experiment, subjects placed inside an echoic chambers, rooms so silent you could hear your organs, began to unravel within minutes. Auditory hallucinations, time distortion, disassociation. Some felt like they were sinking through the floor. Others swore they heard voices that didn't belong to them. But that's not madness. That's revelation. What they found wasn't insanity. It was themselves. The unfiltered version. The mind unmoored from routine input, forced to confront its own architecture. You learn things in that silence. Things you don't want to know, because noise gives you distance from your guilt, from your memories, from your potential. But silence brings it all back. You begin to realize how much you've been hiding behind volume. How many of your beliefs are just echoes of someone else's words. How often you speak to fill space, not to say anything real. In the silence, your lies dissolve. Your performances evaporate. You can't pretend anymore. You can't run, so you dive deeper, past the discomfort, past the hallucinations, into that inner stillness where all your pain lives undisturbed. And that's when something strange happens. You stop resisting, and for a moment, you fall into it. Not like a collapse, but like a surrender. A conscious letting go of the identity you've been dragging behind you, like a carcass. You fall through silence like a trapdoor, and what greets you below is not fear, but clarity. You start hearing what was always there, not with ears, with something else. A hum beneath existence, a pulse behind thought, the blueprint beneath the noise. Some call it the voice of the subconscious, others call it presence. But whatever it is, it speaks in a language older than words, and it shows you things. Not visions, not prophecy, but understanding. You see how deeply conditioned you are, how your reactions, your desires, your impulses, they're not you, they're scripts. And in the silence, you can finally read the footnotes. This is why the experiment scared people. Not because they broke them, but because they revealed them. Not everyone wants to know who they are without the world telling them. Not everyone wants to hear the truth that only silence will say. Because the truth is never loud. The truth whispers. It lives in spaces where sound cannot survive. And when you return from that dive, from the silence that stripped you bare, you are not the same. You move differently, listen differently. You stop wasting words. You stop clinging to noise for comfort. You begin to speak with intention, to act with precision. Because now you know what you were distracting yourself from. Yourself, and perhaps your power. Because once you've heard what lives in silence, you can never unhear it. And that's when it begins. You unlock hidden strength. You don't know what you're capable of. Not really. You think you've hit your limits. You think you've pushed as far as you can go, but you haven't. Because there's a version of you buried beneath comfort, doubt, and distraction that's stronger than anything you've ever imagined. You've just never been desperate enough to meet them. Hidden strength doesn't appear during calm or convenience. It emerges in the moment everything breaks. When your body is failing, when your mind is screaming, when everything you believe about your limits begins to unravel, that's when it rises. Quiet, unshakable, unyielding. Like an ancient instinct you've forgotten how to call upon. But you don't need to believe in it for it to be real. You just need the right trigger. That's what the experiments proved. The secret ones. The ones buried under layers of classified dust and institutional denial. They weren't about breaking people down. They were about seeing what happened after the break. When sleep deprivation pushed soldiers past sanity. When isolation silenced every external voice. When fear reached the point of paralysis and the subject didn't die, but transformed, what they found shocked them. The mind doesn't stop at the breaking point. It evolves. In one test, a subject deprived of sleep for over 10 days reported not hallucinations, but clarity, patterns in time, memories not his own. A perception so expanded, it terrified the researchers into ending the study prematurely. In another, a woman submerged in silence, for 96 hours began solving complex puzzles she'd never seen before, her brain compensating for the lack of noise by unlocking dormant cognitive maps. These weren't superpowers, they weren't miracles. They were capabilities lying dormant in all of us. Hidden strength is real, but it hides for a reason. Because if you always knew it was there, you'd never play by the rules. Strength like this doesn't surface during mild discomfort. It demands stakes. It demands suffering. And that's why most people never reach it. Because we avoid pain. We escape challenge. We build our lives around not needing to push further. But life doesn't care about your comfort zone. And when the world collapses, when betrayal strikes, when you lose everything, when no one is coming to save you, something ancient awakens. You stop negotiating with your limits. You stop reasoning with your fear. You stop playing human and start becoming something else. And suddenly, you can endure more than you thought possible. Lift more than you've ever lifted. Think more clearly than you've ever thought. Because the part of you that's been waiting, watching, whispering, finally takes control. It's the same force that lets mothers lift cars off their children, that pulls survivors through frozen mountains with broken bones, that keeps prisoners sane. Through years of solitary confinement, this is not fiction. This is biology catching fire under pressure. You unlock hidden strength not by choosing it, but by needing it. And once you've touched it, you can't go back. You'll never see yourself the same again. But there's a danger too, because this strength changes you. It doesn't care about comfort or normalcy. It teaches you that everything you feared was just a test, that your limits were lies, that your fragility was a costume someone else put on you. And once that illusion is gone, so is your excuse to stop. Now imagine unlocking that strength, not by accident, but by choice. Imagine pushing past comfort deliberately, living close to the edge, not for glory, but for clarity, not for attention, but for truth. That's what the experiments hinted at. Not a new kind of human, but the original one. Stripped of noise, raw, unstoppable, not broken, just unburdened. And once you've unlocked it, the question isn't how much can you take, but what have you been waiting for? Because if that strength is real, and it is, then you're not weak. You're just asleep. But that's about to change. Because soon, very soon, you drip into dreamland, and something buried starts to wake. It begins slowly, too slowly for you to notice. One blink lingers just a little longer than it should. One thought doesn't quite finish before another one takes its place. The room softens. Sounds blur. You tell yourself you're just tired, but something else is happening. You're dripping into dreamland, not falling, dripping. Like water from a leaky faucet, your awareness slips, droplet by droplet, into another realm. This isn't sleep as you know it. This is transition. You're not unconscious yet, but you're no longer in full control either. Your mind is somewhere in between. And in this in-between space, strange things can happen. Your brain waves are shifting from the fast, alert beta waves of the waking world to slower, stranger rhythms. Alpha, theta, the states associated with meditation, trance, and altered perception. Scientists used to think dreams only happened deep into sleep, but that's not true. The moment you begin to drift, your brain opens the back door. A door to places the conscious mind has no access to, a place where logic loosens and symbols take over. In the 1960s, researchers tried to study this boundary. They kept subjects hovering on the edge of sleep, repeatedly waking them just as they began to drift. What they found was disturbing. The boundary between waking and dreaming wasn't a line, it was a swamp. A murky terrain filled with hallucinations, prophetic visions, and disjointed memories, rearranged like puzzle pieces from a box that doesn't belong to you. People spoke of hearing voices, seeing rooms that weren't there, feeling sensations no one could explain. One subject claimed to have lived another life, start to finish, between 2 seconds of nodding off and being jolted awake. Entire realities formed in moments, all because the gates between consciousness and the unconscious briefly opened. You've been there, haven't you? That moment when the world dissolves and suddenly you're somewhere else. A forest, a staircase, a face you've never seen but somehow know. You ask yourself, was I dreaming? But you weren't. Not quite. You were dripping, seeping into that hidden space beneath your awareness. This is the state intelligence agencies once tried to harness, the hypnagogic zone. The twilight between sleep and wake. They believed secrets could be extracted here, that people were more suggestible, more open to influence. Experiments tested how long someone could remain in that drifting state. The goal wasn't sleep, it was access. Access to the deeper mind, to memories you'd forgotten, to behaviors you didn't realize could be changed. Some artists and inventors swore by it. Edison used to nap in a chair holding ball bearings in his hand. As he slipped into sleep, the bearings would drop and wake him just before he crossed over. He claimed his best ideas lived in that tiny window, that fraction of a second between here and there. That's where genius hides. That's where monsters do too. Because not everything you find in that space is beautiful. The dreamland you drip into doesn't care about comfort. It mirrors your subconscious, raw, unfiltered, and brutally honest. It shows you what you won't face. It whispers what you pretend not to know. And in this vulnerable state, you're not just exposed to yourself, you're programmable. Advertisers have tried to tap into this. Subliminal messages, sleep learning tapes, rhythms designed to embed thoughts without resistance. Because when your critical mind shuts down, your deeper self listens and obeys. So the next time you start to drift, ask yourself, where are you going? Who's guiding you there? Is it your own mind pulling the strings, or something else slipping suggestions between the cracks? You think of sleep as surrender, but maybe it's more like a handshake, a contract between you and the part of yourself you've spent your whole life ignoring. And just when you think you've hit the bottom, just when your thoughts dissolve entirely, something else catches you. Not a dream, not yet, but something more controlled, more focused. Something that doesn't wait for you to sleep, but waits until you're ready to drift into hypnosis. You think you're awake, you think you're thinking, but you're not. Not really. You're drifting, slowly, silently, into something deeper. A state not quite sleep, not quite consciousness. You drift into hypnosis, and you never even notice it happening. It starts small. A pattern, a rhythm, a voice that soothes just enough to slip past your defenses. It doesn't shout or demand. It whispers, repeats, lulls. It wraps around your thoughts and reshapes them before you realize they've changed. And you feel calm. That's the trick. Not fear, not panic, just comfort. You imagine hypnosis as something theatrical, a swinging watch, a countdown, a command to sleep. But the real thing, it's subtle. It feels like focus, like stillness, like clarity. But underneath, your critical mind has gone quiet. Your doubts are sedated.
Your resistance has stepped out for the night, and in its absence, suggestion takes root. Real hypnosis doesn't look like control, it looks like agreement. It feels like your idea. You nod, you agree, not because you're forced, but because something inside you wants to. That's what makes it terrifying. It doesn't break your will, it replaces it. And the scariest part, you've already been hypnotized, not once, not by some sinister hypnotist in a lab coat, but by your environment, by repetition, by language. By the way, a phrase is repeated so many times, you forget it's even a suggestion. You start believing it's just truth. Think about slogans, headlines, labels. You hear something often enough. Success means sacrifice. Money equals value. Failure is weakness, and it bypasses your logic. It becomes part of you, not because you examined it, but because you didn't. Hypnosis thrives in this blind spot, where repetition becomes identity, where familiarity feels like fact. It doesn't matter whether the message is true, only that it's repeated gently, consistently, without friction. You're hypnotized by the very structure of the world around you. Media, culture, norms. They don't argue, they don't debate. They drip feed you truths until your mind can't tell the difference between belief and programming. And this isn't theoretical. Real experiments have shown how easy it is to implant false memories, to alter behavior, to guide decisions, not through force, but through suggestion, through rhythm, through trust. Your mind isn't a fortress, it's a garden, and someone else's hands have been planting seeds for years. You think you're thinking freely, but many of your thoughts were shaped by forces you never chose. Teachers, parents, ads, algorithms, each one introducing tiny instructions that shaped how you think, what you fear, who you trust, and what you want. You didn't choose those desires. You inherited them. You were trained to crave them. And just like that, your preferences aren't yours. Your dreams aren't yours. You've been lulled into a life that was designed for you, but never by you. That's the hypnosis. It doesn't make you sleepwalk. It makes you live someone else's dream, the most dangerous part. You're wide awake the whole time. Because hypnosis isn't about losing consciousness, it's about distorting it, about narrowing focus so tightly you forget everything outside it. That's why people don't know they're hypnotized. They feel sharper, more certain. They feel like they're finally seeing clearly. But clarity in a trance is not the same as clarity in truth. One comes from narrowing, the other from expanding, and you've been trained to love the narrow, to crave the voice that tells you what to do, who to be, what to want. Because obedience disguised as insight feels safe, feels natural, feels right. And that's the final layer. The idea that you're immune to it, that only weak minds get hypnotized, that you're too smart, too aware, too grounded. But that confidence, that certainty, that's part of the trance. It's the voice whispering, you're in control. It flatters you, keeps you calm, keeps you asleep. So ask yourself, who planted your thoughts? Who benefits from the beliefs you hold? What have you agreed to without ever questioning? Why? Because hypnosis doesn't feel like control. It feels like comfort. Until you finally notice you've been asleep this whole time, with your eyes wide open. And just as you begin to feel the weight of that truth, you start to notice something even stranger. You wake while asleep. Your eyes are closed, but something's different. You're not dreaming. You're watching. You feel the bed beneath you, the weight of the blankets, the silence pressing in from all sides. And then it happens, awareness without wakefulness. Your body is still, but your mind is glowing. You're not asleep. You're not awake. You're stuck between. This isn't ordinary sleep paralysis. It's not just the panic of immobility. It's deeper than that. It's like discovering there's a secret door inside your own mind, and suddenly it creaks open. What waits behind it is the most terrifying question of all. What if consciousness doesn't turn off when we think it does? Because the more we study sleep, the less we understand it. Some people, under deep hypnosis or in lucid dreaming experiments, can recount specific vivid details of places they've never visited, faces they've never seen, languages they don't speak. And when these memories are checked, they sometimes match, too often to ignore. Military black projects in the mid-20th century ran covert trials on psychic sleeping. Subjects were trained to remain mentally alert while the body descended into REM. The results? Disoriented. Disturbing. One participant claimed they could see people through walls, not metaphorically, literally. Another described entire conversations between strangers that later proved real, word for word. And then there's the Monroe Institute. Founded under the guise of sound research, it explored altered states through specific audio frequencies. Their experiments documented people leaving their bodies while asleep, not metaphorically, visiting other homes, watching events unfold in real time. One even described a fire before it happened. Another watched their own surgery from the ceiling. This isn't pseudoscience anymore. It's documented, tested, repeated. And every time we look deeper, the message is the same. Sleep isn't the opposite of awareness. It's another dimension of it. Now imagine this. What if parts of your brain are waking up when the rest shuts down? What if sleep is less a shutdown and more a reboot, where old programs restart and hidden ones launch in secret? There are sleepwalkers who have driven cars, written emails, even committed crimes while completely unconscious. And they don't remember a thing, but someone was in control. Someone inside them was awake. So here's the unsettling possibility. There might be more than one version of you. One that walks the world, and another that stirs when the world goes dark. And maybe, just maybe, that second self isn't a dreamer. It's a listener, an observer, a traveler. You think you're resting, recovering. But what if sleep is when you're most vulnerable? What if it's when something else takes the wheel? Some whistleblowers claim early Cold War experiments in sensory deprivation tanks accidentally triggered spontaneous remote viewing. Isolated minds, deprived of input, started reporting visions, accurate, verifiable details from places they'd never seen. Some called it coincidence. But others saw a doorway opening. The CIA ran a program called Project Stargate. It was terminated, but only after years of testing psychic perception under controlled sleep-like states. Documents later declassified showed targets being described with eerie precision. Why stop a program like that? Because it failed, or because it worked? The more we uncover, the more the lines blur. What is a dream? What is consciousness? And where does the mind really go when the body goes still? Because sometimes people wake up in their dreams, they look around and realize this isn't random. And once they know they're dreaming, they can do anything. Fly, walk through walls, visit the dead, see the future, speak to something that doesn't speak in words, but always answers. Lucid dreaming isn't just a mental trick, it's a key. And when you use it, you realize something terrifying. Waking life feels less real by comparison. It's the sharpness of the edges, the clarity of emotion, the feeling that what's behind the curtain of sleep is somehow more authentic than what you face when the alarm rings. And once that thought takes hold, you can't go back. You begin to suspect that your waking life is the illusion. That maybe, when your eyes close, the real you opens theirs. But if that's true, then who's dreaming who? And if you wake while asleep, If you become aware in the depths of unconsciousness, what exactly are you waking into? And more urgently, what will be waiting there tomorrow when the silence stops answering back? You wake before dawn, heart pounding in the unlit calm. The world is still, but it feels loaded with expectation, like the air itself is holding its breath. You listen for a sound, any sound, to reassure you that things are alive and moving. But there's nothing. No hum of electricity, no distant traffic, no rustle of wind, only silence, heavy and thick. It presses against your eardrums until you imagine it can crush your skull. Right here in the lull before sunrise, you taste fear. Silence is supposed to be peaceful. A balm, they say, for troubled minds. But what if silence is an experiment that never ends? You've read the reports, volunteers placed in isolation chambers for days, weeks, deprived of every stimulus, every stray noise, every human voice. At first, it seems like tranquility, a gift. But then the darkness of quiet morphs into a void. It becomes an empty stage where your own thoughts perform without censorship, without costume, without mercy. You start to notice things you never wanted to know. Thoughts you buried deep, memories you hid behind busy days. They rise up like specters in the hush. Every regret, every shame, every secret longing, they echo off unseen walls, growing louder as the world outside sleeps. You can't escape them because there's nowhere else to go. Silence is infinite, bottomless. And in that infinite gloom, your mind becomes both jailer and prisoner. In those experiments, you find accounts of people destroying themselves simply to feel something other than silence. They claw through steel walls, rip at their skin, anything to fill the emptiness. You read how senses fray, taste dissolves, vision dims, even thoughts lose shape. All the boundaries between you and the world collapse. You become pure awareness, raw nerve exposed to a void that wants to swallow you whole. Imagine the terror when you realize silence isn't passive. It's alive, hungry, it listens, it learns, it watches you unravel. And tomorrow, when the silence returns with the same steady persistence, you'll know it hasn't forgotten. It waits for you to slip, to gasp, to beg for any distraction that might save you from becoming a whisper lost in emptiness. But what if silence isn't the enemy? What if it's the gatekeeper, revealing powers you never knew you had? In the deepest quiet, intuition awakens. You feel frequencies of thought that normally slip through the cracks. You sense patterns in the world, the invisible currents that connect people and ideas. The experiments show that people begin to tap latent abilities, lucid insight, remote perception, uncanny timing. They learn to hear beyond sound, to see without sight, to touch the world with their will alone. Yet these abilities come at a price. Every revelation births a fear that you might never return from that inner realm, that your mind, once expanded, will never fit back in the narrow confines of ordinary life. You'll crave that all-encompassing silence, that crystalline clarity. And when the world inevitably rushes back, sirens, laughter, arguments, you'll feel suffocated by noise. You'll long for the void that first shattered you. This fear seeps into your waking hours. You dread tomorrow's silence, not just because it might break you, but because it might transform you. You sense that the silence will pry open your mind, tear away the facades you cling to, and show you who you really are underneath. And you're not sure you want to meet that person. You're afraid they'll demand too much. They'll call you to truths you've avoided. They'll expect you to act on glimpses you can't unsee. So you surround yourself with noise, music, podcasts, the hum of appliances, the chatter of people. You fill every corner of your life with sound, as if drowning, the silence will drown your fears. But noise is a flimsy barrier. It cracks under pressure. In the quiet moments between tracks, or before someone answers the phone, the silence creeps back in, a patient predator. It waits for the lull, the innocent pause to pounce, and tomorrow it will return. You know it. It never truly leaves. It slips through cracks in your schedule, the breath between words, the split seconds when you dare to close your eyes. You can't trap it or tame it. Silence is both mirror and messenger. It reflects every hidden corner of your mind and carries messages you'd rather ignore. What if the true experiment isn't on volunteers in chambers, but on you? What if every restless night, every fear of emptiness is a test designed to show you the power you refuse to claim? The power to sit with discomfort, to face your darkest thoughts, to wield silence as a tool instead of fearing it as a weapon. You could learn to navigate the void instead of running from it. You could use the silence to sharpen your perception, to hear truths unheard, to speak with a voice that emerges from the depths. But that demands courage. Real courage, the kind that stands in utter darkness with a steady heart. The courage to listen to the silence and let it teach you, not torture you. To welcome the quiet, not as a trap, but as a threshold. A door you must cross if you ever hope to know what lies beneath the clamor of everyday life. Tomorrow comes, whether you're ready or not. And when the hush rolls in, folding the world into its embrace, you'll feel that familiar tightening in your chest. The fear will flare, raw and undeniable. But somewhere under that fear is a spark, an ember of possibility. The chance to become something more than someone who merely survives the silence. To emerge on the other side, not broken, but awakened. Because the true power isn't in drowning the silence with noise, it's in stepping into it, unafraid. In claiming the quiet as your realm, where hidden strengths wake and new truths speak. The only question is whether you'll let silence bury you or become the symphony you were always meant to compose.